Hello? Anybody home?
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damn big that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time.
If you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, then you have a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
Tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. Someone who is white is not more special than someone who is black. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much.
It was learned that the aliens had been and were then manipulating masses of people through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion.
They reach into our children in music, television, books.
Prey on children's innocence. How can I disprove lies that are stamped with an official seal?
So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it feels like an altar to an alien god.
Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc is now in the possession of the Army.
Too many others know what's happening out there. And no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth. Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. A case to be filed under M for Mankind in the Twilight Zone.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
It's the heart that says, I will not acquiesce.
Freedom is the privilege to be right. Freedom from the disasters and our mistakes.
You don't connect the dots. It's just a mass of what's all this about.
You are listening to the Secret Teachings Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. Thank you so much for joining me this Friday, July 18th, 2025. Although where I am, it is July 19th, 2025. So I'm still having an issue with the putting up of the live video stream and getting the date and time correct because of the time zones. Plus, my computer is still set to Mountain Time, but Mountain Time, Arizona, which doesn't necessarily participate in daylight savings. So I'm a little bit confused quite often about the time zones and all of that. But we are here live Friday, your evening Friday. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. tstradio.info is the website. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, you can visit the website, click on the link for the free archive, and get access to everything. If you don't like those ads, though, which who does, you can subscribe to the advertisement-free version of the show, which gets you access to a lot more than just the show. It also gets you access to the archive of documents, montages, and if you're a yearly subscriber, digital copies of my books. So tonight's show, and we will go to the chat room here immediately, but I'll mention tonight's show, what it's about first. The promo picture probably gives you somewhat of an idea. The show title is A Picture is Worth 1,000 Conspiracies. And the image shows a small little, what was supposed to be a music pavilion, or some call it a synagogue. It's not a synagogue. Others might refer to it as a ritual altar, but it's a blue and white building that is on Little St. James Island. That was the main, or one of the main, outside of New York and Florida, main hubs of Jeffrey Epstein. And on that building, you can see a golden dome, and you can see what appears to be an owl. And that owl, or whatever that is, it looks like an owl to me, has been the center of conspiracies since at least 2009, because people keep saying, and I have absolutely no filter usually on my show, and I certainly don't have one tonight. Any filter that was on the show is coming off tonight. All these dumb fucking conspiracy theories about how the owl is Moloch are wrong. The owl is not Moloch. The owl has never been Moloch. The owl has never been in any capacity, in any reference book, ever been associated with Moloch. That is not a symbol of Moloch. It has nothing to do with that god, or Baal, the god of human sacrifice or child sacrifice. It has nothing to do with the Bible. The owl has nothing at all to do with Moloch. Let's put it really crystal clear up front. That's ridiculous. However, the owl does have an association with the very things that people are implying that it does by relating it to Moloch, because the owl is a guardian of a Jewish demoness named Lilith. And Lilith, who is guarded by the owl, which has many other meanings and definitions as well all around the world, but Lilith is guarded by the owl. And Lilith, although she has a light side and a dark side, like the white and black veils of Isis, or even the red veil of Isis, the scarlet veil, Lilith is a temptress, and she is also a goddess, or there are different definitions of Lilith. I don't necessarily like calling her a goddess, but let's say the deity that is Lilith. She is the aborter of children. And so it would make a lot more sense that if the owl were put there for some symbolic purpose, other than being the watchful guardian of the island or of the temple that's there on that little island, maybe the owl represents Lilith instead. I mean, after all, Jeffrey Epstein is Jewish. After all, the building is painted in Israeli flag colors. After all, the operation was largely a Mossad operation. So it would make sense that they would be using a Jewish demoness symbolized by an owl to, I suppose, guard, or perhaps they're offering whatever was happening on that island. They're offering up the sacrifices to the owl. That just makes a lot more sense than Moloch. Now you'll see that, yeah, of course, sacrifices are offered up to Moloch. They're offered up to Lilith, although she kind of takes them more than she does receive them. Like, she's pretty active about it in the stories. But you know what? A lot of gods require sacrifices. Yahweh requires sacrifices, but Yahweh is also kind of associated with Moloch and kind of associated with Baal as well, more directly. Okay, but the point is, it's not Moloch. And the more that we continue to talk about Moloch, I don't think, quite frankly, 8 out of 10 people who say that know anything about Moloch and know anything about the history of Moloch, which we're going to talk about tonight in detail, hopefully, if we have enough time. So let's stop just saying things we heard on the internet. Ironically, this show is on the internet. But I don't expect you to believe me, so don't repeat what I'm saying either. Go to the source material. Go to the demonological dictionaries. Go to the old occult books. And you'll find that there's no reference. If you can find one, hey, I'll admit on air, hey, look, I was really wrong. But I know for sure there's no references to Moloch as an owl. Moloch is a bull. All right, so let's get that straight. And that's really, really, really important. Because on the surface, beyond the politics and beyond what lies just below the politics, it's hard enough to get that recognized. But if you go beyond that, which there's a lot more beyond it, you get this type of symbolism. And It's already hard enough to get a discussion started about the politics of it, let alone what is the real true undercurrent of what that entire project operation was all about, which was just one of many, but what it was all about, which was about a lot more than just sex and compromising people. And I think that's pretty obvious by the blatant imagery, both within and without, inside and outside of these complexes that Epstein ran, both in New York and on this little island. In fact, there's actually a closer similarity between the Nickelodeon logo and Little St. James Island than there is between Moloch and the owl. That's how unbelievably wrong and inaccurate these conspiracy theory assessments are of the owl. Where does that even come from? Probably Bohemian Grove, right? Where does that come from? Probably Alex Jones, right? And what is the Alex Jones audience? Well, they're largely conservative type Christians. And so you're like, oh, that's why, because Christians don't know what the fuck they're talking about when we're discussing symbolism, especially if we're talking about biblical symbolism, because most of them interpret those things as absolutely literal, which is also ludicrous and ridiculous. Okay, so no gloves on tonight. That's my introduction. Let's go to the chat room and see who has joined us, and then we'll get into the specifics of the show. I'm not actually angry. I'm just sick and tired of the talking points, which then lead us to, if I say it's not Moloch, I must be working for the deep state, and I was also on the island. It makes no sense. It's not Moloch. That's it. Leave it alone. Go read about what Moloch is first before you open your dumb mouth. That's the bottom line. I'm just so sick and tired of this conspiracy nonsense. I mean, here's another example, and we'll go to the chat. I literally this week was in Tokyo, and there was no flooding, and yet on the internet people are telling me Tokyo's completely flooded. It's like, first of all, Tokyo's the largest metropolitan city in the world. There's like 39 million people that live there in the surrounding areas, in the central city and all the suburbs. Okay, it's unbelievably massive, like incomprehensibly massive, underground, outward, upward. And I was just there, and the city is not flooded. And yet people online are telling me you're a denier of geoengineering. No. I was just in the city. It's not flooded. That's what they want you to think. It's like, oh my God. And these are not sock puppets. These are actual people that have listened to my show for years. And now they're just completely consumed by, oh, there's a flood. It must be geoengineering. Really? Because according to the statistical data, places like Tokyo, places like New Jersey, New York, like most of the places that are getting flooding have actually seen a decrease in rainfall, have actually seen a decrease in flooding, have actually seen a decrease in overall rainfall for a single day. There's no record, I don't think, with the exception of Texas. I think the record was matched. No other place got record rainfall. No other place got record anything. So anyway, I did a whole show on that this week. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. I'm sitting here looking at it, and people tell me, no, you're wrong. You don't understand. It's all geoengineering. How is it geoengineering? There's no flooding. There's no flooding. So how is it geoengineering? Well, that's what they want you to think. They're covering up the flooding with lasers from space. It's like, oh my God. Whoever runs all of this conspiracy stuff online have really just successfully, completely corrupted the minds of virtually anybody who has ever accessed the internet at this point. All right, because I'm done. I'm digressing. Let's go to the chat room. So B. Kuna is here. Thank you for joining us on the show. I think B was the first person in the chat tonight. What if we should do something special when someone's the first or second person in the chat? We should do something special on Friday nights. I'm still getting used to this, so maybe I'll think of something. Patriot Girl is here. I believe Patriot Girl was the second in the chat. Noka is here. Aloha. I hope Noka said they were looking forward to tonight's show. I hope a lot of you were also looking forward to tonight's show. Evan Kelly is here. Hello, Evan. Someone named 6G Agenda finally made one of these live shows. 6G Agenda is right. I'm assuming you know all about the Samsung white paper and the digital extended reality, hologram reality. King Sweet is here. Thank you for joining us. Michael M is here. Thank you for joining us. Nada is here. Thank you for joining us. And Bad Whiskey is here. Howdy, Bad. We also have Virgil Vertrees, is that correct? Good day, Mr. Gable. Good day, Mr. Vertrees. Flux is here. Flux is always here. Ron Patton is here. Oh, he put something up in Japanese. What does it say? Go Ryan. Go Ryan, go. Arigatou gozaimasu, Ron-san, Patton-san. Thank you, Ron. Who else is here? Arlene in Arizona. I'm assuming you're in Arizona, Arlene. The time thing always had me messed up, even living there. But living overseas now in a different time zone and having my computer, I need to change my computer setting. It's very confusing. All right, who else do we have here? We have Gordon Shumway. We have Edward Preston. I'm putting all of these names up on the screen. If you're just listening in audio only, we're going through the list of live viewers in the chat. Marion May. I appreciate, Marion, you backing me up on the owl thing. Yes, that's just pisses me off. It frustrates me. Something terrible. Samantha, thank you for joining the show. Says, I love when I can catch a live show. Rita Moore is here. I think the topic will be even more interesting as we go through the details of it tonight, Rita. Emma is here, and we got a long list of people. I have to go through this relatively fast. Lancelot is here. Lancelot says, I'm here to piss you off. Well, it's a show. Let's see what you can do. What do you have to piss me off? Just tell me the owl is Moloch. That'll do it. Blair M. Hi, everybody. Hello, Blair. Sir Wolf is here. And a long list as we go down this list of there's a lot of people listening who haven't commented. The Sylvia is here. Love your live video. Shoes. I don't have shoes on. I know you meant shows. I don't have shoes on. I'm barefoot right now because it's about 90 degrees in here. Antonio is here. Howdy and welcome to the show. Gordon asked me, do you have a cat? No, but I'm assuming because of your profile picture, you'd like to perhaps have breakfast or have lunch or dinner wherever you are as Alf. I don't have a cat. I would never live with an animal. I just think animals are dirty. Don't hate animals, just prefer not to live with animals. All right, and then King Sweet says, I'm in the middle of the Texas flood. I've seen it flood like this a few times over my life. It's nothing new or unheard of. All the talk of weather conspiracy is nonsense. Yes, it is. And in fact, not only is it nonsense, it is the opposite nonsense to something like climate change. It's just the alternative to climate change, where no weather is natural. Look up the statistical data for anybody who doesn't believe King or doesn't believe me. Look up the statistical data. And it'll show you that most of these places, including Tokyo is getting less rain this year and this month. I think we're even getting less typhoons this year, where the average is like 1 to 3 that actually make landfall. Everything is normal and natural. The only thing that changes is that you all have a cell phone in your hand and you have a constant stream of information, most of which is completely out of context, including the Tokyo information, which was like, it was like a 3-second video of rain. It's never rained like this in Tokyo. Well, you've never been to Tokyo. It rains. I didn't know it rained like that until I came over here. And then I was like, well, I got to buy a really good umbrella. And I didn't know I didn't know how much of Tokyo was even underground. Somebody showed me how to go underground to the stations and wander around the city. It's like Las Vegas. I had no idea. And that's part of the issue too, is that we get to explore the world through digital devices and we don't actually get to go out in the real world. And I think that is part of the reason, in a similar vein, it's part of the reason why we think the owl is Moloch too, because we don't go and look at the books. We don't go and read the references and the sources. We just hear something on the internet and then it becomes our dogma. And if anybody contradicts it by saying, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not Moloch. I'm pretty sure, that might be Athena. That might be Minerva. It could even be Diana. That could be Lakshmi. That could be a number of different goddesses, usually goddesses. It could be a god too. That could be Hitotsume, the Japanese owl. That could be Lilith. She's guarded by owls. It's just like, yeah, I'm going to digress off the point here again, but when you have like actual mythological references to owls in the context of what was probably going on and what we know was going on that island, why not talk about those? Why bring up Moloch? It's because of this nonsense, bullshit, conspiracy, Bohemian Grove stuff. Yeah, that's real, but the owl is not Moloch. And I'm going to repeat that so many times tonight that you're never, ever, 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 ever going to be able to think about any of this stuff ever again without knowing that the owl is not Moloch. It's just so ridiculous. Okay, so before we get to that, what I wanted to do was, if you haven't noticed this, if you haven't seen this, I'd assume that all of you have, especially the dedicated listeners who have tuned into this show over and over again. I guess I wouldn't say religiously, but semi-religiously. You probably noticed that this is a pattern. I'm going to play some clips for you. You probably noticed this pattern that has unfolded with virtually every issue. Doesn't matter what the issue is. There's always a similar script that's being read. There's always a similar narrative that's being spun, especially by, your kind of left wing and right wing podcast people, or what people now call podcast bros. I'm going to play a mixture of left and right wing, or I don't even know what that means anymore. But people all saying pretty much the same thing about Epstein. Let's listen to some of these. I hope that you can hear them clearly. If you cannot, please let me know in the chat. But let's see if you can hear some of these clips. This first one is that paid off. He's an influencer who's paid by Israel. So it's obvious where his stance is on Epstein. This is the misfit patriot.
Can deliver an Epstein list, or you're not going to win the next election that you can't even run in. What's the threat to Donald Trump? You're not threatening Donald Trump. You're threatening America. You're a fucking terrorist. You're holding this country hostage if you don't get your way. Sound familiar?
You're holding the country hostage if you don't get your way of having the files released. Here's Ben Shapiro. I can't play all of this because we don't have the time. It's not important. But just to get a general idea of what Israeli Ben is telling you.
Thousands of hours of tape. There are, by the way, but they are child pornography. The reason the FBI is not releasing them is because those tapes do not include underage people with third parties on Epstein Island. That is not what the tapes are. Okay? I also have sources in the federal government who are covering this stuff and have seen the documents. Okay, those tapes are just child porn. That's all.
Nobody said that they wanted to see the child material. All they said was, we'd like to see the list of the people who participated in making that child material. Nobody wants to see the videos. That's the talking point, though. Of course, we can't release them. That's child, you know what? We can't do that. That's just, who wants to see? You're sick if you want to see that. And if you're going to hold the country hostage, you're a terrorist. While Ben sits there with his little Jew hat on and pretends like he's not working for a foreign government. Here's another one. This is a lengthy one, too. We're not going to play the whole thing, but this is Adam Sosnick. I've never even heard of the guy. Another big podcast bro kind of a person. And he's going to tell you why you also really shouldn't matter.
A lot of people over the weekend sort of have very emotional responses to what's going on here. And I put these people in three categories. There's
stupid, stupid, and really stupid.
That's just your third category, Vinny.
Gotcha.
I'll save the best for
Gotcha.
last. There's the people who want the truth and they're frustrated. And they have every right of knowing that. I totally get those people. Totally understand that. The second tier of people, I believe, are people who are eating their popcorn watching this. It's like Game of Thrones and House of Cards and Tiger King all in one for these type of people. And then there's a third type of people, like my friend Vinny, who I love very much. And Jeffrey Epstein is living rent-free in your head. And you can't shake it. And every morning you wake up, you're like, we need more information on Epstein.
Actually, I don't actually
It's like
listen.
you're watching the
That's
show.
That's not what I do in the morning.
And you're speculating, oh, it's this guy. It could be him. I don't know what's going on. When the reality is, and I mean this sincerely, You don't know shit, bro.
Oh, yes, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
Because
I'll retort when you're done.
If Pam Bondi is saying something, and Kash Patel is saying something.
Oh, I believe them.
And Dan Bongino is saying something, and Trump is saying
the government
something.
wouldn't lie at him. You're right.
Okay,
The government would never lie.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you don't know.
That's Adam Sosnick, who is also Jewish, just like Ben Shapiro. Pretty sure they've got a reason based on that alone to divert and to obfuscate and to use fallacy to do those things in making people who are wanting to know who was on the list look like idiots and make them look like you don't trust the government. You're paranoid. See the kinds of fallacies and the talking points. I've got friends in government. They told me that it's okay. Why are you still talking about this? You're holding the country hostage. Let's move on. This is something that's living rent-free in your head. Yeah, I kind of get the picture. It goes on. Here's Dinesh D'Souza. It's really time to stop talking about Epstein.
I'm going to talk about the Epstein files, and I'm going to make the case that even though there are unanswered questions about Epstein, it is in fact time to move on. Part of being on a political team is maintaining a certain amount of maturity, recognizing you can't win them all, recognizing there are some things that are important to you that are less important to the guy that you've put in charge, who is trying to focus on things right in front of him. And so having a sense of perspective, having a sense of balance, having a sense of maturity, I think is more important even than getting to the bottom of what really happened.
So if you want the Epstein list, that means you're not really that mature. Okay, that's good to know. You're not that mature. And just like you heard Ben Shapiro say that he's got friends in government, here's the same talking point from Charlie Kirk.
Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands. I've said plenty this last weekend. So if you guys want to see my commentary on it, that's fine.
I love how if you watch that video, and I'm not showing you these because I don't want to have this particular show removed from YouTube. It's funny if you watch these videos, Charlie Kirk to say, I've got friends in government and I'm going to listen to them, has to read that off of a piece of paper. That's how sure he is of what he's saying. He's actually reading that off of a piece of paper, or I'm assuming if not a piece of paper, a tablet or a computer that is just below where the camera is, because he's looking down at it, looking back. Let me see what it says. Okay, I have friends in government. All right, I'm done. I'm not talking about it anymore, which is the same script that Dinesh D'Souza got. It's the same script that this other guy, Sosnick, was using. Oh, don't you trust your friends in government? Don't you trust Pam Bondi? Do I trust Pam Bondi? You mean the woman who was a legal advisor to Pfizer, who, by the way, just dropped an investigation into Pfizer? You know who runs Pfizer, right? Another Jewish CEO. You know who their chief scientist is, right? You want to go down this long list of names? You think that they might have been involved with Epstein? I'm sure that's all just coincidental. So let's listen to Pam Bondi. Let's listen to Dan Bongino. Let's listen to Kash Patel, whose girlfriend works for PragerU, which is run by, literally on their website, it says it proudly, run by a woman who is Israeli intelligence. That's right. The FBI director's girlfriend, who's like 20 years younger than him, is employed by Israeli intelligence. I'm sure that he's totally trustworthy. I'm sure that Bongino, who when asked what's really, really important to you, says the defense of Israel, not the defense of the United States, the defense of Israel. Did anybody see that Congress just had a vote? Anybody see the vote that Congress just had? Marjorie Taylor Greene and like 5 other people, and this is not incredibly important for tonight's show, but I wanted to show you this. This was the vote in the House. And the vote was on an amendment to defund, I don't know how much, like $500 million or something, defund Israel from U.S. taxpayer dollars. virtually the entire Congress minus 10 representatives voted against defunding Israel. That's unbelievable. Virtually the entire Congress voted against it, with 10 exceptions. That's, or rather, well, I guess 6 exceptions. There were some no votes, but 6 exceptions. That's really a powerful number when you look at that. You look at that, and you're like, what, literally the entire U.S. Congress is basically the government. The entire representative body of this country voted to give more of your money to another foreign country that has sabotaged peace, that has infiltrated and blackmailed politicians, that has attacked our country, that has threatened our country, that threatens citizens, that blackmails citizens, that controls the media. And, well, it's obvious why they all voted to not defund Israel, because they're all compromised by Israel. It's really clear to see that. So when you see these talking points from the people I just played, Kirk, D'Souza, Sosnick, Shapiro, and so on, that's exactly what they are. They're talking points. They're being given a script. They read the script. And I'm pretty sure, you know how all those Biden scripts came out where he had to be given cue cards to say, like, hello? It says, like, Biden, walk into room, look around room, shake hands with somebody, place, it's like SpongeBob, firmly grasp it in your hand, shake somebody and and SpongeBob moves his shoulder. No, you got to shake hands with your hand like this, not your shoulder. And then they have to tell him, say hello, look people in the eyes. You're going to see something like that come out eventually too. We already saw that with the soda stuff and Snap, where the soda companies were paying these conservative commentators and liberal commentators to say things like, soda's about freedom. Just literally a script. You're going to see the same thing about Epstein. It's a script. That's all that it is. They're repeating and regurgitating talking points. It's time to move on. You're holding the country hostage. You don't really know anything anyway. Let's move on. We got other things to talk about. It's like, no. This isn't just a political issue. This is one of the defining issues of the 21st century. This is one of the defining issues in American history, because we're not just talking about blackmail. We're not just talking about people that are having sex or getting massages with young girls, 15, 16 years old. Many of which, by the way, took money from Epstein for college or for living, people that maybe didn't have families in some cases. You know, there's a fine line here, like Hollywood actresses that, you know, will give you a hand job for a movie role or something more significant than that. Like, how old? Every case is individual. How old is the person? How did they get there? Are they there by choice? You know, all of this matters. But beyond that, when we go back to the owl, when we go back to that conspiracy about Moloch, it's a lot darker. And I'm pretty sure that ultimately, if you were to see a list of the people involved, you'd see every single person who just voted in the House to keep sending money to Israel. Every person that just did that would be implicated by the release of that information. Every single person, directly or indirectly, would be implicated. We're talking about members of Congress. We're talking about members of the House, the Senate, members of the executive branch, the judicial branch, the stay behind networks, the people that they're never elected, but they're there for 15, 20 years or 30 years in power. I'm sure there's probably aides involved because they would have known about it. There are people that are not household names and people that are household names. There are people that are celebrities. There are people that are not celebrities. There are royalty. There are billionaires. There are people that work in the media. Like, everybody's involved. Or if you're not involved directly, you know about it, which is another reason, you know, I'm not really that big on, I don't know, the Ricky Gervaises and others that just suddenly feel like it's safe to say things that are unpopular. Where were you when it was very unpopular to say those things? Now that it's acceptable, now they're heroes. Like, no, Ricky Gervais is not a hero for saying what he said. He would have been a hero if he would have said that shit like 15 years, 20 years ago. He's not a hero. Russell Brand is not a hero because he did a bunch of drugs and had sex with a bunch of women and then decided one day to grab a Bible and suddenly he's an expert on the World Economic Forum. Fuck him. These people are all part of the same system. It is a system of corruption. It is a system of influence, a system of power peddling, of compromise. It doesn't matter if they're Christians. It doesn't matter if they're atheists. It doesn't matter if they've got red, green, purple, blue hair, or if they've got fake blonde hair and a nice suit. It doesn't matter. They're all part of the same team. And that team is not on your side. And the very small, very few number of people who you think are on your side, oh, maybe Tulsi Gabbard's on my side. Well, no, she's on the side of the World Economic Forum. You might think, well, I mean, there's some people that are kind of on my side. I mean, there's a couple members of Congress. People have, mentioned, the Cottons and others. And it's like, no, they're all part of the same team or same club too. I mean, it's not that there's a giant conspiracy. It's just that at some point you get into a position of power and there's not much you can do. And do you really want to throw everything away just for the media to trash you and destroy your reputation and destroy your family? Is it really worth it? I mean, if you really got that list, I'll say this lastly, if you really got that list, who's going to prosecute people? Who's going to objectively present it? It's not going to be me. If you got that list, who's going to talk about it? Charlie Kirk, the guy that said, don't worry about it. He's the one that's going to be able to talk about it and tell you what's really in it, which is the equivalent of CNN telling you, oh yeah, you can't have those Hillary Clinton files. Those are ours. You can't have those. And if you do have them, it's illegal for you to read them. That's who gets it. That's who gets it. They already did it once. They gave those files to a bunch of influencers at the White House. Remember that? Isn't that nice? They gave them to a bunch of influencers. One of those influencers worked for a guy who was literally photographed with Epstein near the Lolita Express on the tarmac. One of the guys that was an Epstein client is literally the guy who is he represents a woman who got those files at the White House. All these influencers, Rogan O'Handley, DC Drano, fuck him. Chaya Raichik, libs of TikTok. Oh, she's bringing attention to the problems of the liberals, the libtards. No, she's a Jewish agent, literally. Liz Wheeler, Scott Presler, Emily Austin. You know who these people are? Rogan O'Handley is presented as this conservative commentator. He's a Christian. He's not a conservative Christian. He's a liberal Jew from California who was an entertainment attorney. Did you know that? I'm sure that a liberal Jew from California who's an entertainment attorney walked away from that lucrative lifestyle to become a conservative Christian commentator. That makes plenty of sense to me. The libs of TikTok. She's proudly an Orthodox Jew who just is really, really concerned with how horrible the conservatives are. Listen, if you read Mustache Man's book, he talks about this, that they play both sides. That's the bottom line. Liz Wheeler, this woman's disgusting. Social influencer, another one. There's so many of them. She speaks on conservative issues. She's a Christian, which is really irrelevant because her content is the same that you get from the libs of TikTok and Rogan O'Handley. He's an O'Handley. He's not Jewish. No, he is. He said that on X himself. He said, I'm a proud Christian. I love Jesus. I'm also Irish. I'm also Jewish. And he said that on at least two different separate occasions. And then there's Scott Presler. Scott Presler is a really interesting one. He's called a MAGA celebrity, which I think has two meanings. And he's the guy that started Gays for Trump. Conservative Christian who started Gays for Trump because that's kosher. That makes sense. And this guy, before he became a conservative for Gays for Trump, he was a weird left-wing loser. He was a left-wing hack. In fact, you can find pictures of him where he is dressed up like he's in Antifa, except maybe not the black militant Antifa, but maybe like Antifa had an awards ceremony and they all dressed in drag. That's how he's dressed. That's the guy who started Gays for Trump. He's one of the people that got the Epstein, quote, files. And then there's Emily Austin. This is the one that you're going to be particularly interested in. Emily Austin is really easily exposed because Israeli news networks have done pieces on her, talking about how she's a, quote, this is a quote from I-24, Israeli 24 News. She's a Jewish influencer who joined Israel's UN mission in 2023. So she is part of the UN on top of that. She spent time when she visited Israel with the president, Isaac Herzog, and top rabbis like Shmuel Rabinovich. Emily is also represented by the Wasserman Group. Do you know who founded the Wasserman Group? Casey Wasserman, Jewish. But that's not really important. What's important is Casey Wasserman has been identified as having two pretty big skeletons in his closet. One, he's been identified as a serial adulterer, and he is, or was, I guess depending on if the guy's really dead, a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. Literally. In other words, the woman, one of the main women that got the Epstein file, which she has the Star of David on, literally, it's not a joke, it's not an exaggeration. She literally is represented, she's a conservative, oh yes, represented by a liberal left-wing Wasserman group that's been founded by a guy who still runs it, who is literally in the Epstein cult. So they gave the files to somebody who was working for the people in the cult, just like Kash Patel's girlfriend works for PragerU, which is run by an Israeli intelligence agent. So you're never going to get the files because the infiltration is so deep and so profound. Americans couldn't handle the truth if it bit them on the ass and the face. You wouldn't be able to deal with it. And beyond the compromise, it's worse than compromise and blackmail, bringing us back to the owl. And Lancelot is accurate in the chat when Lancelot, one of our listeners, says, mega celebrities, what an embarrassment of human ignorance. It is an embarrassment of human ignorance. You want to know what else is an embarrassment of human ignorance? Back in the 80s, when Jonathan Pollard, one of the worst spies ever in Israeli U.S. history, well, he was good for Israel. He wasn't good for the United States. When he was caught, which was right around the time that AIPAC started to dump a bunch of money to American politicians, around this time that he was caught, we started to learn back in the 80s about how deep the blackmail and the infiltration, the spying was with Israel. And around that time, he was caught in what 85 roughly, around the 80s into the 90s. We started to see the deep infiltration. And you know who sent Pollard back to Israel when he was finally released from jail? Sheldon Adelson, the billionaire casino magnate who gave Trump a bunch of money. That's the guy. He's the one that actually not just sent Pollard back to Israel. He financed it with a plane. He also lobbied to get him out of jail, sending back to Israel. And while Pollard was in jail for spying for Israel, they let Netanyahu come visit him in a U.S. jail. They let the guy who leads the country that Pollard was spying for come visit him in a U.S. jail. It's beyond infiltration. No. It's not infiltration. It's not black. It is absolute and total control of the key pieces of government. That's it. They don't have to control everything, just the key components. A little media here, a representative there. You've got the whole system. It's pretty much that simple. So What do we do about this? Not sure there's anything we can do about it, quite frankly. You're not going to get answers from the government. You're not going to get answers from the podcast bros and hoes. You're not going to get answers from the people that get the quote files because they're working for the people that are in the files. You're not going to get answers from anybody. You're not going to get the files. And then if somebody says, well, let's have a conversation about it, and you say, okay, and they say, well, why would you want to look at child material like that? Why? Nobody wants to watch those videos, okay? Nobody wants to watch. If you want to see Jewish perversity, just go to the porn industry, because virtually the entire thing is run by Jews, all of it. You want me to go down a list? I actually just edited a section on this for my book last night. You want to go down a list of the companies that are run by Jews? Let's do it. Digital Playground, Mofos, Twisties, Reality King, Tube8, RedTube, YouPorn, Brazzers, Dog Fart, Blacks on Blondes. You want me to keep going down the list because it gets worse. And every single one of these companies, including AVN, including Pornhub, Vixen, Tushy, Blacked, all of them are run by Jews. Every single one of them. And it's worse than that because the obscenity laws in the United States were changed by Jews. The first play to ever display or ever show, the first production to ever show lesbianism was a Jewish play. And it was so obscene on Broadway that the director was actually arrested and charged with obscenity because they had a Jewish in the play. There's a Jewish brothel, and the Jewish guy running the brothel wants to have a moral brothel, like that moral concentration camp they're building in Rafah, like the moral IDF, wants to have a moral brothel. And he's trying to marry his daughter off, who then falls in love with a prostitute hooker in the brothel, and then they start having sex with each other. That was back in the early 1900s. I think it debuted on Broadway in 23, but it was written in 1906. It debuted on Broadway in 1923. That would be pretty disgusting even by today's standards. All Jewish. Like the whole thing, sex lines, Jewish. The hardcore pornography of Al Goldstein, Jewish. It just goes on and on and on. All the top porn stars, Jewish. James Dean, Ron Jeremy, Joanna Angel. I mean, how many more examples of this? Jews completely, 98% control the porn industry. You want to see really perverted stuff? You don't need to see the Epstein files. Just go to the internet, type in pornography. You'll find all the classic Jew websites. That's what it is. They're all Jew websites, every one of them. OnlyFans, Pornhub, and all the other brands. They're all Jewish. And you know what? Quite frankly, it's a struggle to realize that. When I was writing that section for my new book and just kept finding, I was like, there's no way. There's no way. Vivid Entertainment, no, Vixen, no way. Pornhub, which is run by a rabbi. There's no way. They're literally all run by Jews. What are the chances of that? That's control. And Pornhub has been implicated and investigated by the Department of Justice for human trafficking. When does it start to make sense? When does it start to make sense that what Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf was accurate? It doesn't mean that you have to be a zealot and believe it and love Hitler. I don't love Hitler. But at least in chapter 2, he's right. And he even says that in the book. He said, all my feelings, rebelled. I didn't want to believe it. I just kept looking and kept finding that every disgusting, perverted, immoral piece of material that was in society was always made by a Jew. Why? And he even says in the book, it seems like Jews, unfortunately, were selected by nature to play this disgusting and perverted part in the world. See, the thing is, as we're going to get to the owl, this is all necessary. The thing is, I know that this kind of stuff sounds inflammatory. And although nowadays it's kind of popular to say, oh, it's so popular. Even Alex Jones has mentioned it recently. Okay, but the thing is, people like me have been saying this long before the Nick Fuentes came along and said that you shouldn't have interracial marriages and that it's only white people that should matter for white people. It's like, first of all, Nick, there is no such thing as white, black, or anything else. Everybody's a mix. There's very few people that are actually 100% one thing. It's very, 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 very rare. And even then, technically, even Germanic tribes were not necessarily white. They were Germanic. You can't say there's a white or any other kind of civilization because everybody is a mix. It would be like calling, Asians are just all Asians. Well, it's like, well, they come from Asia, but the Koreans are very distinct. The Chinese are very distinct. Every part of Asia is very distinct. And even in Japan, where you have the Jomon and the Ainu, Japanese are very distinct from that. And over time, what was a mix becomes a different category. So you can't, this is the problem. This is the point I'm getting at here. What is happening is that there is going to be a movement. I've said this for now a couple of years. There's going to be a movement that's going to come out of all of this. And that movement is going to be, quite frankly, it's going to be horrifying. It's going to probably be pretty accurate in its assessments, but it's going to be pretty aggressive in how it handles those and deals with those things. In other words, you're going to get, for better or worse, you're going to get a Hitler 2.0. There is going to be a person who comes along, charismatic or otherwise. They might just be crass, and they're going to tell you not just what you want to hear, but they're going to tell you the truth. They're going to say exactly what I'm saying, except they're going to be a lot more vicious and vile and nasty about it. And when that happens, you're going to get a movement of people that support them. And then you're going to find yourself at a crossroads. Which would you prefer? Would you prefer Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower? Or would you prefer a society that's run by perverts and pedophiles? And you're going to have to make the choice. Do I want Hitler or do I want pedophiles? It's a hard choice because they're not, I would probably pick Hitler. And that's the issue that we have here. And as more and more people recognize that Jewish or that Israeli or that Zionist or all three influence, guess who gets targeted first? Jews do. Jews should be the ones that point this out, especially if they're Orthodox conservative Jews who point this out the most and speak about this the loudest, because guess who's going to be the first person targeted? Jews. Even if you look like a Jew, you might not be a Jew, you're going to be the first person targeted. Which is really my motivation behind talking about this kind of thing, because I would like to live in a free society, and I think that everybody has a right to speak. The problem is when you have some people that undermine the morality of society, then we have a problem. So from a historical perspective, let's get this straight. That's what's going to happen. And the Epstein story is important to this because you're already seeing Elon Musk say we need a third party, right? We need a different party and a different kind of an American party. That's what's going to form. And somebody's going to come to power and they're going to say, look, all of these people are corrupt. And look, I don't know how that's going to go down. It might mean that they murder everybody in Congress. It might, I don't think we should do that, but that might happen. It might mean we murder everybody in Congress. We restart. It might mean they take complete control and say, we're declaring a state of emergency. Everybody in government's corrupt. We're getting rid of all the judges. You might think, oh, that's a great idea. Not a good idea. This is where we're heading. And if the American public learns what that list is really about, I don't know if people are going to kill themselves or if they're going to riot, or if they're going to sit silently in a room and stare at the wall for several hours or several days or weeks until they starve to death. It's going to be a combination of one of those things, because what they were doing was not just blackmail. It involved so many people you can't comprehend and imagine. And if you got the real list and you learned what they were actually doing, you're going to be like, well, I thought we were evolved as a species. I thought that this kind of thing didn't happen. I thought that this was confined to like the heathenistic cults of the old world. Oh, no. They do the same thing today. They drink the blood of children. They sacrifice children and adults. They rape infants. They do all kinds of horrible things. And by they, I mean, yeah, anybody who is defending that list is implicated and probably guilty. How are you going to have a trial for all of those people? You can't. You're going to have a judge oversee a trial when the judge is on the list? I mean, hell, the bailiff's probably on the list because everybody's compromised. And the few that aren't. Okay, so I think that should be pretty clear. Okay, pretty clear. Now let's move on to J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover is a really interesting person, okay? Not just because he liked to dress up in a different type of clothing. Okay, but J. Edgar Hoover is the man who shaped the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, out of the BOI, Bureau of Investigation, founded in 1908. And he called Louis Buchalter, who's a Jewish mafia, a Jewish gangster, the most dangerous criminal in the United States. Nicknamed Lepkelly, or Lepkelly, or Little Louis, his specialty was labor racketeering. Now, a lot of you might not know that virtually 50 to 60% of the mafia back in the 30s, 40s, and onward was Jewish. And some of the worst gangsters were Jewish. There's a whole list of them. Lansky was one of the most famous, but there's a whole long list of them. And this is important because J. Edgar Hoover famously called the mob. What did he call the mob? He called it baloney. So it didn't exist, right? In fact, he never acknowledged the existence of the mafia. He didn't acknowledge the existence of the mob, right? Never did. And that meant he was denying not only organized crime or an organized crime syndicate, he was denying an organized crime syndicate that had some dirt on him. He denied that there was an organized crime syndicate in the country and said that most of the crime was localized. So there's no organized crime. It's all localized crime. That's really, really important. It's really important because as I'm explaining this to you, I want to show you the letter that came out from the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There's the letter right there. I just put it on your screen. And I'm going to read it to you if you're an audio listener. It's also linked up in the show description below. So J. Edgar Hoover famously called the mob baloney, denying not merely an organized crime syndicate, but that there was any such thing as a mafia. He emphasized that crime was merely a localized issue and in no way part of some larger conspiracy. One paraphrased quote summarizing his overall stance was given in an interview where he said, "The FBI has no knowledge of any such thing as a national crime organization. We deal with facts, not rumors." Put simply, Hoover denied the existence of the very organized crime network, much of which was comprised of Jews, that was blackmailing him. The network was partially run by Louis, Little Louis, who Hoover called the most dangerous criminal in the United States, probably because he was blackmailing him. He also called Lansky was one of the kingpins of organized crime in the United States. It was Lansky and Costello who were blackmailing J. Edgar Hoover. Compare that to the immensity of the Jeffrey Epstein case. What they had on Hoover was recordings and pictures and maybe even video of him with his lover, one of his aides. Compare that to Jeffrey Epstein. It's a very similar story. Because whatever the Epstein case is, what the White House just did is very similar to what Hoover did. If you read this document that the DOJ and the FBI put out, it says this: the files relating, this is a direct quote. It is halfway down the page if you want to look at it yourself on the screen. The files relating to Epstein include a large volume of images of Epstein, images and videos of victims who are either minors or appear to be minors, and over 10,000 downloaded videos and images of illegal child sex abuse material and other pornography. Again, nobody is looking for that. Nobody wants to see that stuff. I don't think anybody wants to see that stuff anyway. Nobody's interested in that. Okay, but what we are interested in is the people involved. And they're telling us that doesn't exist. The paper says this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. Consistent with prior disclosure, this review confirmed that Epstein harmed over 1,000 victims. Each suffered their own unique trauma. Each suffered unique trauma. Now, to me, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds like exactly like what Hoover had said. The systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. There's no client list. They're denying that there's a list. There's no mafia. It's baloney. But Epstein did harm a bunch of people. So there is crime, but it's not organized. It's local. Because each one of his victims suffered unique trauma. Okay, I'm going to put myself back up on the screen for a second. You understand what the DOJ and the FBI are doing? Is they're using the same Jewish mafia / Italian mafia. They're using the same mob talking points that were used by J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, they're very close to being identical. There's no organized crime. It's all local crime. Otherwise, this idea of a mafia is just baloney. There's no Epstein list. There's no organized blackmail network. There's a lot of victims, but those are all unique individual cases. It's all localized cases. There's no mafia. It's the same exact argument. It's the same exact story. We have a listener in the chat named Lima. Lima says, Meyer Lansky was basically running the Epstein operation from Cuba back in the days. It's exactly what the mafia was doing then. The CIA was doing it. Operation Midnight Climax. Whether it's a honeypot operation or it's a blackmail operation or it's involving a lot more than that. The evidence is utterly overwhelming. And the fact that the FBI and DOJ are using the same J. Edgar Hoover talking points, who was blackmailed by these people, means that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and the Bongino guy who's a hack, all of these people are obviously compromised by the same mafia, kosher or otherwise. They're all compromised by it. Now, that doesn't mean that they were engaging in illicit acts. It means that there might be blackmail that is unrelated to that. It might be threats. It might be something we can't imagine. Okay, but the fact is, they are clearly complicit in this. And we see the inversion of reality when we're told by misfit patriot, that demon, that you're holding America back by not letting go of this. No, actually, you're holding America back by letting go of it. This is what the media is masterful at doing. Every time Israel does something wrong, they invert reality. They shoot at some diplomats in Gaza, then 2 Israeli diplomatic aides get killed. They want to build a concentration camp in Rafah. That's illegal to even make the comparisons in Israel. They say, well, that's just a criticism. This isn't a concentration camp. It's a moral holding facility for people, which is the definition of a concentration camp, which were not Nazi inventions, by the way. If anything, the Spanish invented them and the British invented them. They were not German inventions. And the Gulag system, the Gulag archipelago, was far worse than anything that the Germans operated, which were largely, almost exclusively, labor camps and for prisoners of war, which happened to be communists and revolutionaries, which exclusively almost were Jewish. So that would make a lot of sense why most of them in the camps were Jews. And there were only a handful of, quote, extermination camps, and very few of those even had we're getting into an area that we don't need to get into, but very few of those even had the equipment even in the 1943, to be able to carry out the quote final extermination solution. Not to mention, if I show you blueprints for Auschwitz, you know how they supposedly killed millions of people at Auschwitz? They took them down 3 or 4, maybe 5, maybe maximum 5 or 10, maybe 10 if we're being real liberal, elevator, and then a narrow hallway, and then killed them, and then drug all the millions of bodies out and took them back up an elevator. It doesn't make any fucking sense because it's fabricated by the communists. It's fabricated by the Soviets. You're saying people didn't die? Of course people died, but 6 million Jews. You want me to go back to 1869, where the same story was being told about Russia because of the Pale of Settlements that was set up 100 years plus before that? It's the same narrative over and over and over again. It's atrocity propaganda. It's fear pornography. It's blackmail. It's compromise. It's children involved. And it's a bunch of disgusting perverts and pedophiles of all backgrounds. It's the intelligence community. It's Zionist Christians. It's just bad people at the end of the day. Really bad people. And it doesn't matter where you look in the world. Human sacrifice is a common theme. All over the world, human sacrifice is a common theme. It's a very, very old practice. It's not confined to the Jews and to Moloch. It's a very old practice. And that is important because that means it's a universal thing. And if these people are performing some form of human sacrifice, that means that they're practicing a very old religion. And I think that is the perfect place to transition into the question of the picture with that's worth 1,000 conspiracies. So I'm thinking about how to transition into this, okay? There's a couple of things that I kind of wanted to show you. I'm now thinking that maybe they're not relevant, but let me pull some of them up that I have links for if I can. Some of these articles aren't loading. Let me see if I can pull some of these articles up, though. Yeah, okay, so here's one of them. And here's the other one. Okay, let's start with this one because it's unrelated to Epstein. But let's start with this. Okay, this is just some kind of a random thing that I had seen on Facebook. I want to show you this because I think it relates to the show tonight. All right, this is some random kind of a post that I saw. And it shows people doing the so-called X sign or the Osiris sign. Okay. Now, despite the fact that there's a lot of context probably missing from like all of these images, a lot of context. I mean, I've done this before. So what am I, part of the Ordo Templi Orientis? I mean, am I, doing the Osiris pose? I mean, like, yeah, but this also has other meanings and other cultures. That's another thing about symbols that are really interesting. In fact, there's a good point made in the movie, The Da Vinci Code, about that, where, one piece of clothing in one culture is like, what was that movie? It was like Eastern Orthodox religious garb, but in the US it was like KKK garb. Context of this stuff matters. So, okay, the point is, you see that video of the people doing the X cross, putting the arms across their chests. Yeah, it's just a whole bunch of celebrities doing that, and this gets the conspiracy juices flowing because obviously people don't know what that pose is and have a really hard time dealing with a whole bunch of random. Just a whole bunch of random pictures. They think that it's significant or symbolic of something. So, okay, what does the X represent? Well, it represents a marker that marks a particular spot, and under that spot that it marks is usually treasure. So if you put your arms over your chest, what's going to be at the nexus point between your arms? Your heart. And the heart is a seat for the soul. The heart is a seat for the sun. And those are symbols of great wealth, great power, consciousness, spirit, God. So at the center of that cross, where the 2 points merge, passive and active, this is where you get the gold of the alchemists, okay? So I said in this comment, I said, Osiris is not satanic. They said that this is proof of Lucifer worship. Totally different characters. And then this dumb, God damn it, I hate this hashtag, symbolism will be their downfall. What the fuck are you talking about? What does that even mean? Symbolism will be their downfall. What is the context of 3.5 minutes of random celebrities doing this cross over their chest? I've done this cross. Some of these poses are people posing for pictures. You know, some people do this in pictures. Some people do that in business profile pictures. That's the first thing. Other of these things are like different signs, different symbols. But it's not satanic. It's not Lucifer. It's Osirian. And Osiris holds his arms like that because Osiris is the god of agriculture. And as a god of agriculture, he's concerned with the changing of the seasons. And in order to be knowledgeable about the changing of the seasons and larger cycles, you need to be aware of the changing of the heavens, which is why Osiris carries in the image that you can see. First of all, he's green because he's the god of agriculture, not because he's an alien. That's dumb. Some things are dumb. That's dumb. He carries the crook and the flail. Why does he carry a crook and a flail? Well, these objects herd the bull and the ram. The bull is Taurus, the ram is Aries. So you have to be knowledgeable about the stars, about the heavens, about the cycles, if you want to eat and survive. The Egyptians didn't go to Giant Eagle. The Egyptians didn't go to Walmart grocery. They didn't order Grubhub. They had to plant the stuff that they ate. They had to harvest the stuff that they ate. That's what Osiris represents. Among other things, he represents that. He's green because he's a god of agriculture, and he holds the crook and the flail because he herds the bull and the ram. And that is Taurus and Aries. And you might think maybe this is just a silly side note. It's not. It's actually a very critical structural support column for understanding what the owl is. Okay, so again, he's green because he's like the green man, the Celtic green man. He's a god of vegetation. The crook and the flail herd the bull and the ram, Taurus and Aries. These are two different ages. You'll also notice two other details. In this particular depiction of Osiris, he's not actually holding his arms completely across. He's holding them like this, a little differently. He's holding them like his hands together, and it kind of makes an X or a V. Now, a V would symbolize the womb, which is where you would plant the seed. The X would represent, underneath of it, the gold. That what you're getting is the you're sowing what you're reaping what you sow. Okay, there's a lot of meaning in this, is the point. Okay, the other thing you'll notice is, have you ever laid down in a sarcophagus? You ever lay down in a sarcophagus before? Pretty sure that there isn't like unless you get a really big coffin today, but in these days, you lay down in a sarcophagus. They weren't necessarily built to be able to lay back and stretch out. So guess what? You'd have to put the arms on top of the body like this. And then if you were too tall, you would take the leg bones and you'd place them next to the skull, which is where the Jolly Roger comes from. So in regard to agriculture, this is part of a cycle, life and death, death and life, which means that Osiris is a god of living and a god of the dead, which is why he judges the dead in the hall of judgment, which is the end times of the Christians and the final day of judgment. It's completely taken from Egypt. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that it's right. It's just it's a metaphor. It's not literal. In the hall of judgment, Osiris judges because he is a god of the dead. And there is the heart feather being weighed against each other. The heart represents desires, the things that you really, really desire. And if you have too much of that desire, you cannot move on into the afterlife. So you have of that desire. And if your heart is lighter than the feather, well, that means that you've gotten rid of the desire and you're ready to move on. Here's the heart, and here's the feather in the hall of judgment. So writing, here's Horus, the sun who takes you through the afterlife journey, and here's Osiris judging the dead. And that's what happens when it's wintertime. The god of agriculture goes underground. This is the story of Demeter, Persephone, Hades, who is the fall and the winter raping Persephone. It's not a story about rape. It's a story about how the fall takes over the spring and the summer. This is where we get the apocalypse from, the lifting of the veil, and the goddess goes into the underworld. Osiris is in the underworld. He is the god of the dead, but he's also the god of life because he sprouts forth from the underworld later and brings life back to the world. That's the Jesus story. That's the Amaterasu story. It's not just a solar deity. It's also an agricultural deity. It's not just a solar motif. It's an agricultural motif. That's important. Okay, so when people are saying stuff like, symbolism will be their downfall, you don't know what you're talking about. It's Luciferian. It's like, no, it's Osirian. And Osiris has like nothing to do with Lucifer. In fact, Osiris is like the total, absolute, utter opposite of Lucifer. Lucifer is the bearer of light, of false light. And the only comparison you could make between the two is to say that the physical solar sun, the solar disk, is a fake light because it's emanating from the real world. It's emanating from the mind of God. Otherwise, Lucifer is what dazzles matter with things that makes you want more matter. And Osiris judges you in the afterlife based on how much desire you have, which means, these stupid, dumb Q fuckers, it means that I wish I could just not curse. This stuff pisses me off so much. Maybe I'll do another show where I'm not cursing so much. But what it means is, if Osiris is judging you in the afterlife based on how much desire you have, and you can only proceed if you have no desire for the physical world, then how the fuck does Lucifer, who dazzles you with physical material desires, have any relationship to Osiris? Because Osiris doesn't want you to have attachment to those things. He wants you to get rid of those things. He won't let you move on in the underworld until you get rid of those things. You have to get rid of the desire to move on. That's what Florence Welch's song, Florence and the Machine, The Dog Days of Summer, that's what it's about. It's about Egyptian mythology in part. The dog days are coming. That's Sirius, the dog star. You'll have to leave all your love and your longing behind. You can't carry it with you if you need this, if you want to survive. Yeah, you can't carry that shit with you in the underworld. You have to let it go. And Osiris wants you to let it go. So he can't be Lucifer because Lucifer wants you to hold on to it. It's just so dumb. But who do you think gets to talk about this stuff? It's not an expert like me. It's fucking idiots that get to make dumb comments online because the algorithm from the CIA pushes those comments to the top and makes that person an expert when they don't know what the hell they're talking about. This is the only thing I am an expert at. I'm not an expert at anything else, but I'm absolutely an expert at this. And this shit is just annoying. It's like the last time I was on InfoWars, the Harrison Smith show with Kriston Harris hosted it. Same exact thing. Sat there and I broke down a PEP and the eclipse. And instead of actually thinking, oh, that's really interesting. You know what the Info Warriors did? These Christian conservative wackos, they were analyzing the book collection in the background. Oh, look, he's got a book there by Archie Brown. It's called Communism. I didn't know they let Marxists come on this show. It's like Archie Brown wrote a book about how horrible communism is. The InfoWars people identified it as proof that Brian Gable was a communist who didn't believe in God. They had their binoculars out. It's like, oh my God, nothing's ever going to get solved. And that's honestly one of the best things about living overseas and living in a country that's primarily Buddhist, is because Buddhists and people that practice Shinto are accepting and don't really like care and don't really make it about dogma and doctrine. It's just a peaceful culture. And that's just really nice, which is what Christianity should be, not crusades and murdering people who don't agree with you. Same thing with Jews and Muslims and everybody else. Anyway, I should do a short video just on this part alone. Lucifer cannot, is the point. Lucifer cannot be Osiris and vice versa. Okay, first of all, this image of the cross, this is Osiris. Let me make the short clip right now. The image that you see on your screen of the arms crossed is a symbol of Osiris. It signifies where the seed is planted, it's agricultural, it's solar, and it's sexual. Underneath of that cross, where it marks the spot, is the soul, the heart, and the seat of the sun. That's the seed. The seed grows, you're born again, you're resurrected. Lucifer wants you to hold on to all of that stuff. He dazzles matter with, he's like the bedazzler of reality. But it's all fake. Osiris wants you to let go of all that stuff so you can proceed on your journey into the afterlife. Osiris is dead and alive. He's green because of agriculture and because of vegetation, and he holds the crook and the flail because he herds the bull and the ram. These are ages. These are astrological symbols, and that's important if you're going to be an agricultural society. You can't just go down to the grocery store and buy food. That's what Osiris represents. Now, let us move on to the next subject. Let's move on to the owl, and we'll spend the rest of tonight's show on this. I hope you understand why I spend so much time building to something, because it's important to understand the background. And I'm going to try to spend the remainder of tonight's show not cursing, not getting upset, or more so frustrated. I'm not really upset. Just try not to get upset, try not to get frustrated, and present this in a very calm manner. Okay, so I saw this on X. This is something Owen Schroyer posted. And I used to not like Owen that much, not as a person, but just as a broadcaster. And I think he's grown a lot. And I like some of his stuff now. I'll listen to some of his stuff now. I think he's one of the very few people that clearly has his head on straight when it comes to the subject of Israel. But he posted this on X, and I had been watching a Schroyer video, so that's why it popped up. And he shared it from some other person named Grimm on X, but this is all over the internet. It's all over social media. And funny, since I had originally commented on this, a community note was posted. Let me read this to you for those of you who can't see it. So it says, Owen Schroyer is being sarcastic. He says, stop talking about that Moloch guy. He's wrong about that. It's not Moloch. Grimm, another one of these commentators, says, why was there a synagogue on Epstein's island with an owl statue tied to Moloch mounted on it? This runs far deeper and darker than most can grasp. Okay, well, as I said, it's not Moloch, and it's also not a synagogue. And I'm glad that there was context added to this by readers. It says the building was reportedly a music pavilion. That's true. Not a synagogue. That's true. Moloch, a Canaanite deity, was bullheaded, not owl associated, per biblical and archaeological evidence. The owl link stems from modern conspiracy theories. That's 100% accurate. That's exactly what I needed to say, summarized in a few lines. So I commented on this. Of course, nobody gives a fuck. It's a great question, but the owl is not Moloch. The latter is a bull. There is still a direct connection to what you're implying, though. And this is what I get in response. Somebody posts this, an old black and white video and an image of Baal receiving children as part of the sacrifice. And I said, what's that supposed to mean? Because I just said the owl is not Moloch, and then they post a picture of Moloch as a bull and imply, I'm guessing, it is an owl? Do they not see the bull that they posted? You know, so then the person says they don't believe in our God. They use to sacrifice their children to a bull. Well, yeah, a bull, not an owl. Like it's not the same thing. And then I responded back to the guy and said, I don't understand what you're talking about. I said the owl is not Moloch. And then there's never any response. I don't think this person's even a sock puppet. There's so many of these people online. They don't know what they're talking about. I guess that's just the nature of social media. Okay, I get it. But that's the nature of the conspiracy world too. That's the nature of all the commentators and all the documentary makers and all the people with Blue Yeti microphones who get in front of a microphone and just talk about conspiracies without knowing what they're talking about. And what is more popular? What gets more attention? Do you think an objective breakdown gets more attention? Or do you think hysteria like, oh my God, it's Moloch? I don't think they even know who Moloch is. I don't think they know anything about Moloch. The most they know is Bohemian Grove, which doesn't tell you anything. Okay, so let's do this. Let's look at the history of Moloch. Let's look at the history of what it is, what it's supposed to be, what it represents, the symbolism of it. In the book of Acts, the Jews are accused of setting up the tabernacle of Moloch. That's Acts 7:41 through 44. The tabernacle of Moloch is noted in Leviticus 18:21. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. There's more than one reference to this in the Bible. Okay, so Leviticus and Acts, and then people also will link Revelation. Moloch has a number of different meanings. Moloch means rim fan. Yes, it actually has a connection to Apis, the golden bull of the Egyptians, which is basically Taurus, which is herded by Osiris, who has that crook and flail again, the X cross. Also Chun and a number of other deities. I'm going to show you my Occult Arcana book because I have a section on this so you can actually see it. Okay, this is the so-called Star of Saturn, so-called Star of David. You can say, oh, it's the Seal of Solomon. Well, I mean, it is, but it's not really the Seal of Solomon either. It's a universal and ancient symbol. And this is what it looks like. This is a talisman for the planet Saturn, who has the hexagram, and Saturn is also part of the basis for Satan as the adversary, but a necessary evil, and who has horns and is associated with Father Time and death, so long white beard and a scythe, and because of the agriculture again. And then if we go through and search my book, we're going to find such a giant book. We're going to find the Moloch section. It's a section on sex magic. And we'll scroll down here to, we'll start here. I have some of the really good pictures of Moloch and the idol in my book here. You can see that on the screen. Okay, so I'm just going to start out reading what I wrote, and it's not too incredibly long. This is what I have in the book, and this is really, really important in regard to the owl. Okay, so these arguments are nothing more than the reemergence of Rimfan's cult, one that demands, as Levi writes, the hatred of children, which involves an unknown power compelling certain subjects to kill them. Recall in the book of Acts how the Jews are accused of taking up the tabernacle of Moloch, that ancient deity associated with child sacrifice. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch, says Leviticus 18:21, referring to the same Canaanite demon named Baal. Originally associated with fertility and rain, Baal was in constant conflict with Mot, the god of death and sterility. It's a very agricultural similarity to Osiris here. Over time, he became a demon of abortion, like certain incarnations of Lilith. Colin Duplancy writes of Moloch in his Infernal Dictionary, which is like the source that you should be going to if you want to learn about this, not stupid stuff on the internet. Moloch is a horrible and terrible demon covered with the tears of mothers and the blood of children, says Duplancy. The rabbis claim that in the interior of the famous statue of Moloch, the god of the Ammonites, people created 7 kinds of cabinets. They opened one for 4, another for doves, or flour rather, another for doves, a third for sheep, a fourth for a ram. See that ram again? ram's horn of the Jews, the fifth for a calf, the sixth for a cow, and the seventh for a child. This is what gives or gave rise to Moloch being confused with Mithra and his 7 mysterious doors with 7 rooms. When they wanted to sacrifice children to Moloch, they lit a big fire in the interior of the same statue, but to prevent hearing their plaintive cries, priests made a great noise with drums and other instruments around the idol to prevent you from hearing the baby's cry. Not only today, but even in ancient Rome, fertility rites are largely reduced to grotesque orgies that strip the true purposes, symbolic or otherwise, away from the act of sex, which itself has become little more than animal debauchery today. Sensual indulgence for its own sake will not serve the magician's purpose, writes author Richard Cavendish. This is not to say that highly restrictive sexual practices are any less destructive, but it is sacrilege and infernal to suggest that uninhibited sexual exploits are the true path to openness, to oneness, or to enlightenment, and it is utterly delusional to suggest they are the means by which to fight patriarchy and corruption. And I go on to describe a little bit more in regard to sex magic. Okay, so I show you that because it's, a condensed version of my overall thoughts on the subject rather than just kind of rambling on. But Moloch, that's what Moloch is. There's arguments and debates on where the name comes from. Some argue that Moloch or Melech means or has a relationship to the term shame. So any kind of barbaric practice could be considered shameful. It could be considered Moloch-esque. But there's no link to the owl. And that's really important. I want to show you something else. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for that, and I'm going to show you a series of images here. When you're looking at the owl itself is a very, very, very powerful deity because the owl can see at night. The owl can turn its head all the way around. And so, the owl has been used as a symbol of the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, Bohemian Grove. Francis Bacon used the owl to stand on the books of philosophy and science and wisdom. The owl comes in a variety of different forms, but it usually represents fortune, luck, wealth, and wisdom. So when you look at Bohemian Grove, as you see on the screen here, the owl at Bohemian Grove is not Moloch. In India, the owl is known as Lakshmi, the primary vehicle associated with Lakshmi. The owl represents wisdom, knowledge, and foresight. It's in India. As the Vahana vehicle of Lakshmi, the owl serves as a reminder to seek wisdom and enlightenment in our pursuit of wealth and prosperity, which is what the Bohemian Grove gathering is essentially all about. Seeking wisdom in your pursuit of wealth. The wise man tells us to let go of our thoughts and cares. That's what the Buddha teaches, right? Let go of your thoughts and cares. That's what the cremation of care at Bohemian Grove is all about, burning away your cares in your pursuit of wealth and power. That's what Bohemian Grove is actually about. The owl also comes in the form of the Greek Athena, the Roman Minerva, or the Japanese Hitotsume. As a matter of fact, over here in Japan, I went to an owl shrine. Golden owl. Well, it wasn't technically an owl shrine, but they had an iconic owl statue there. And you put a coin in and you can touch it, and it's supposed to provide you with fortune and luck. It has the same meaning in Japan that it has all around the world. This image at Bohemian Grove, that is not Moloch. That is an owl. That is Lakshmi, that is Athena, that is Minerva, that is Hitotsume, among others. It's also the queen of owls, or the queen of night, or the queen of the underworld. She has many different meanings. That's Lilith. The image that you see on your screen right now, you might have seen this if you're just listening in audio form only. This is an image of Lilith standing on the guardian or guardians. The guardian, usually they're dogs. They could be foxes. They could be lions or tigers. Standing on the guardians. Guardians to what? Well, guardians to the portal. In the case of Lilith, She's female. And since she's female, she is the portal. She's the gateway, like the Torii gates in Japan and Korea. You walk through that gate, you're in another world. You come through the portal that is the female. However, Lilith has her legs closed. The portal is closed. She does not give birth to children. Instead, she gives birth to demons. She is the antithesis of femininity. She's the antithesis of relationships and the birthing of new things in life, not only children. She is the aborter of children. She is the tempter of men. She is the succubus. She is the perverter of sacred sexuality, which is why it's so disgusting to watch liberal progressives use her image as some symbol of the sexual revolution. Because whether they know it or not, they're actually promoting the kinds of things that Epstein was involved in. Maybe they like that. I don't know. Her resistance to man is not human, however. It's not like a human man. It's mankind, as in human beings considered collectively the human race. She's opposed to mankind. She does not like children. She does not like men and women to be in relationships. She consumes life force. She consumes your blood. She consumes in your dreams. She actually is the cause of wet dreams. She takes the sperm. That's what she uses to give birth to new demons, like the blood that Kali licks up. And you can see here, this is from one of my encyclopedia books. It says Lilith is flanked by owls, her sacred animals. Created with Adam, she rejected his authority and consorted with demons. She wears a crown of lunar thorns and a rainbow necklace. A rainbow necklace. Where do you think LGBTQ comes from? Pro-abortion, pro-sex anytime, anywhere, rainbow flags, hates families, hates kids, hates mankind, wants to destroy everything in the name of green projects. That's where Lilith comes in. You can see on the left and right side of those guardians that are guarding the closed portal that you have owls. And historically, anytime a woman would be depicted in this way, it signified, it represented, it symbolized. You see that her feet aren't human feet. That's because she's not fully human. She rejected Adam. She rejected humanity. And when she did that, she became part demon, and she consorted with demons. She transformed into a demon. She became of the night. She became the temptress. There's a story about this in India as well. There is in fact, maybe I can pull this up on the screen here. Let's see if I can bring this up as well. This is from another book that I wrote. I will see if I can pull this up. Yeah, here we go. There's a couple of pages here. Well, it's probably, you know what? It's probably better just to, takes a second. I'll take that off the screen, remove it, and I'll put up this other book I wrote so you can see. I'll scroll through it. Okay, so here we go. This is a book I wrote called Garden of Hallucinations. This character here is called a yaksha. A yaksha is, well, it's going to kind of remind you something similar to Jeffrey Epstein. So she's the weeping woman. She is a nature spirit. In Hindu mythology, nature spirits called yaksha are known to harm and even eat children. Lilith is the Mesopotamian and Judaic temptress of men and aborter of children. She steals the souls of kids while they sleep in innocence and makes men ejaculate in their rest, using the semen to birth demons. So what is a yaksha? What is the queen of night? Well, pretty straightforward. They're half human, half demon, or half nature. Now, if we're looking at yaksha, she's mostly natured. She's almost got like a poison ivy kind of a feel to her. It's because nature takes back what nature gives. Everybody eventually dies. In the case of Lilith, she's half human, half some kind of monstrosity, half demon, which means that Lilith has rejected her femininity. She's rejected humanity. And when you do that, well, you're a demon. You're opposed to God's creation. When you do that, you become an outsider. When you reject motherhood, when you reject family, when you reject, like from a biological standpoint, you become the antithesis of all those things. If you reject childbirth, you're an aborter. If you reject motherhood, you're anti-mother, you're anti-creation, you're anti-life, you're anti-God. You reject using the gifts that God has given you to bring new life into the world, innocent new life. That is Satanism. Okay, so this particular deity, a Jewish demon of abortion, a Jewish demon of kidnapping children, stealing the sperm of men, that makes a lot more sense if we were to look at the owl on Epstein's island and find some deeper significance in it. It would make a lot more sense that it was a symbol of Lilith or a Lakshmi than it would that it's a symbol of Moloch, because it's not a symbol of Moloch. And so you see in an hour and 40 minutes what we've done tonight on the show is that if you just say, Moloch, I'm done, and you walk away, you have now introduced a false and misleading and confusing idea into the social space. And maybe you don't know that, that's okay, but it creates not just confusion, it doesn't just mislead people, it pollutes people's minds. And so if you really want to have an actual honest conversation about what Epstein really was and what he was actually doing and the whole of the movement, plus what he was doing at the Zorro Ranch, which was basically eugenics and breeding a master race, like the chosen people master race, you can't do that unless you have a deeper understanding of what the owl itself signifies and symbolizes. It's not just, it wasn't placed there on top of that building by accident. In fact, that building was one of the places people speculated they were taking kids to murder them. I don't necessarily think that's true per se, but I do know something else that's really interesting. If you look at this island and you look at this particular building, here's the original design, and then here's the building. I believe there's no dome or no owl on top of it here in this image. Well, I think they had there was a hurricane or something that destroyed part of it, but this was the original design. And you see what's here on the floor, these little red lines. You see that? Okay, now I'm of the opinion that beyond Lilith, those red lines represent something else. What I think they represent, if you're curious, I think they represent the Minotaur. That's what I think they represent. Because, see, in the story of the Minotaur, yes, it is metaphoric of human and animal sacrifice, half human, half bull. It's an abomination that was created. It's in the middle of the labyrinth. But as a kind of sacrifice to the Minotaur, 14 young people, teenagers, would be given to the Minotaur. Those 14 pieces also, I think, have something to do with the 14 pieces of Osiris, but that's really neither here nor there. Okay, the point is that I think it's a maze. And I think that that symbolism has been totally overlooked. In the mythology, Europa was a princess of Tyre, courted by Zeus in the form of a bull. She bore him 3 sons, one of which was Minos, the legendary king of Crete, whose wife, Pasiphae, gave birth to the Minotaur. This creature was half man, half bull, and confined in a labyrinth made by Daedalus. Not sure if I'm pronouncing these names correctly. The monster represents our animal self, or the dragon that comprises part of our being. He was slain by Theseus, the son of Poseidon. Labyrinth represents the difficult path placed before all students of occult philosophy. Let me bring this up on the screen so you can see this too. I am extracting this from my Occult Arcana book. There we go. A labyrinth represents the difficult path placed before all students of occult philosophy in navigating the many passages and secret chambers that conceal truth. It also represents the common difficulties of life. Those able to overcome and learn from such difficulties are said to slay the Minotaur like Theseus, and those unable to do so are themselves killed or lost in the labyrinth of illusion. By completing the maze, a student is able to find that at the center is self and that all answers come from the divine within. Killing the Minotaur is an animal sacrifice of the ego and a human sacrifice of passions to God. The symbolism of the bull directly relates to the horns of Isis, the Egyptian bull Apis, the bull killed by Mithras, that's Taurus, to bring in the age of Pisces. That's the same bull that Osiris herds. When Hermes was able to free his consciousness in the stories, like the slaying of the Minotaur, from the bondage of bodily senses and the illusions of the material world, his divine nature revealed to him the mysteries in the form of a great dragon. That's your DNA. That's the dragon slayed by Siegfried. There's a story like this pretty much anywhere you look in the world. There's also a famous story about this in Japan as well. It has the same meaning. Okay, so in the mythology, in order to appease the bull in the center of the labyrinth, they would sacrifice 14 young men and women, usually 7 men, 7 women they would sacrifice. This is the story, okay? There wasn't an actual bull in a maze. I guess some people might believe that. Hey, maybe there was a bull in a maze. I don't think there was. I think it's a myth, and it represents what I just explained to you. But they would sacrifice children to it. And I mean, in a sense, what is happening here is that that's inside, and so much of innocence gets destroyed by keeping stuff inside, keeping things bottled up, not telling the truth. There's a lot of meaning that can be extracted from this story. If you interpret it literally, then we're sacrificing actual people to an actual bull that's also got like 70% human features, like a man with a bull head. I think there's an episode of Dexter where they use this myth as one of the killing areas. And I think there's an episode, one of the later seasons of Dexter. I love that kind of stuff. That's what the labyrinth represents. And that's what I think this also represents on Epstein's Little St. James Island. I think that's part of a labyrinth. You can see it there. It's very labyrinth-esque. Oh, it's just some kind of mosaic design. Maybe it could be. In fact, it probably is. But I think it might be more than just a mosaic design. I think that it might be a representation of the Minotaur, which would mean that the people that were being funneled into Epstein by Maxwell, this basically makes her the king, and it makes Maxwell the Minotaur, and she was sacrificing children to this beast, just like the Jews sacrificed kids to Moloch. That, to me, and as much as I'm an expert on a lot of the symbolism stuff, I don't know for sure if that's what it is, but to me, that makes a lot more sense than, oh, it's an owl, and the owl is Moloch. Like, you see how that statement might do well on the internet, but if you really want to understand this stuff, you need to go beyond what people on the internet say. You know, the people in the videos that are like down here in the bottom corner, they're like, hey, look at this video right here. Look at this video someone else who doesn't know what they're talking about posted. This is the truth. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. Okay. Epstein was the Minotaur. He was the bull at the center of this maze. The young men and women were brought to him. And Maxwell was like the king who fed those children to the Minotaur to appease it. Beyond that, the owl represents Lilith. The owl represents the temptress of men. Pretty sure that's what they were doing there. They were tempting mostly men, but women as well. But they were tempting people. They were tempting people. And they were compromising people. And they were blackmailing people. And based on the owl imagery, that's all based on the maze. Based on the owl imagery, I'm pretty sure that children were probably being offered up as a sacrifice too. So that means that we can just say all that stuff, just say whatever, see what happens. Who cares? Nobody's held responsible. Or we could try to figure out maybe what the owl represents, what the labyrinth represents, see how the Labyrinth and the Minotaur story aligns with exactly what we know for sure about Maxwell and Epstein and the whole network. And then we can elaborate further by looking at the owl, relating it to Lilith, seeing that she does not like kids. And you know what? Quite frankly, the Jews don't like Gentiles. And so maybe there's something more than just compromise and blackmail and feeding kids to the Minotaur in the middle of the maze. Maybe they were sacrificing kids because they have that image. They have that symbol of the owl there on the island. I've actually done a number of shows on this in the past. I think I did a show. It's actually in the archive. I'm looking at it right now. December 29th, 2021. Woman in the Maze. Looks like Kristan Harris even joined me for that show. I said Ghislaine Maxwell has now been convicted of sex trafficking crimes in relation to her more famous associate, Jeffrey Epstein. The trafficking of underage girls and boys for massage parties, sex favors, blackmail, and more is akin to the mythological story of the Minotaur and the Maze being fed young Athenians as tribute. I was talking about that 4 years ago. Doesn't go viral. Never will go viral. It's too much to process. Don't have all the answers. People have made, some people have made really good investigative videos and found that there's, a lot of other symbolism inside that house, not just the Bill Clinton painting. I didn't ever think much about this, but yeah, it does. The island does kind of look like the Nickelodeon logo. It really does. I don't know if that means anything, but it kind of looks like it. That's interesting at the very least. It kind of looks like it. Kind of. You have to really turn your head and but it kind of looks like it. And there's a stronger connection between the Nickelodeon logo and the little St. James Island than there is between the owl and Moloch. There really is. Let's look at what Donald Trump has said about Epstein. It's fake. It's not real. It's a scam. We have a perfect administration. We're the talk of the world. Listen, you ain't the talk of the world over here in Japan. I can tell you that right now. People might like Trump, but Japanese are pretty pissed off because of the massive increase in tariffs. It's like 30%. Not very happy about that. And they're about to go vote this weekend. Probably driving right into the arms of the liberals if it weren't for all the Chinese immigrants that are driving them into the arms of radical Japan First parties. But that's a whole nother subject. And then here's Trump yesterday. Everybody's like, oh, just one more chance. Based on the ridiculous amount of publicity given to Epstein, I have asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to produce any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. This scam perpetuated by Democrats should end right now. I don't know. Last time I checked, they didn't release shit today. So just another hit of that hopium right to your veins. Just, can I have some more? It's going to happen at some point. And then stop talking about it. Don't talk about it. Okay, there's a lot more to this. Than an owl and Moloch. And I think we've made that very, 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 very clear. The owl is not Moloch. The owl is Lilith. If there's any relationship to what they were doing, who they are, and the symbolism of the owl, it's not just things in secret. It's a Jewish temptress of men and a Jewish aborter of children who wears the rainbow necklace. Lilith is what that owl represents. These were largely Jewish Mossad. They are corrupters and perverters, tempters and aborters. That accurately describes Epstein and Maxwell and the whole network. Wexner, Wexner is a whole nother. So we did a whole show on him. The Debuk, he says he's possessed by a Jewish demon called Debuk, who makes him crave money and power. It's more likely that we're just dealing with things that most people have never heard of before. Who's ever heard of a Jewish demon named Debuk? Raise of hands. Anybody ever heard of him? Anybody ever heard of Lilith outside of like witchy circles? Probably not. You never hear of Lilith unless someone loves Lilith and like worships Lilith. What is Lilith? She wears a rainbow necklace. What do you think Lilith represents? Her legs are closed. The guardians are guarding the closed portal. There's no kids coming through there unless they're demons. She births those out of a different place. And the owls guard her because she's in the underworld. They guide her in the underworld. It's like Osiris is guided by the eye of Horus in the underworld. These are metaphors and allegories and parables and symbols. And clearly they're utilized by powerful people for what we can speculate are probably pretty nefarious purposes. And I believe also, I can find this real quick before we're out of time. I believe if you go to the image of Epstein's New York house, doesn't he have like this is kind of unrelated to tonight's show, but doesn't he have if I can find this. I might have to save this for another show. I thought that there was some kind of Medusa head on the door, but it doesn't look like Medusa to me. Probably another one of those things people have no idea what they're talking about. Anyway, we'll maybe save that for later. So anyway, yes, Lilith is likely what the owl represents. It's not Moloch. And likely that maze that you see on the ground, that maze is the Minotaur story. And that makes a lot more sense if Epstein is the Minotaur and Maxwell is the owl. You have both of those symbols right there on what looks like the flag of Israel, the golden dome, which also has a powerful symbolic significance in relation to what we can kind of assume was happening there. And that is the best assessment that I can provide you. And I hope that it's been informative, and I hope that it's been something that you've been able to learn from, and you can take this with you and apply it to further investigations or further readings on this subject. All right, let's look really quick at the chat room. I apologize. I've been talking the entire show. We did mention the chat room earlier. We have a lot of new listeners in the chat tonight, and we have a lot of listeners who have been here before. I'll go through some of these as fast as I can. Lima was here. Lima had said something about Meyer Lansky, which we talked about earlier, yes, which is like another key point of tonight's show. What Hoover said about the mafia, that they were baloney, they didn't exist, is exactly what the DOJ and FBI just said about Epstein. Hoover said, there's no organized crime. It's all local crime. It's not a syndicate. But he was being blackmailed by the syndicate. This is what the Trump administration, the DOJ, the FBI, and pretty much everybody else, left and right, has done. There's no Epstein network. But he did abuse a bunch of kids. But those are all individual cases, on a local level. They're not really part of an organized crime network. It doesn't exist, just like Hoover. And just like with Hoover, it's primarily Jews that are running the operation. Blackmail. Israel put spy devices next to the White House. Trump knew about that in 2019. Netanyahu brings his own dirty underwear literally to the White House for staff to wash. Jonathan Pollard was one of the worst spies. AIPAC. I'm actually considering maybe I should do a third hour. AIPAC. In fact, let's do a third hour. How about that? Let's do a third hour, and then I got to go. It's really hot in here, but let's do a third hour. AIPAC I was going to save this for another show. Let's do it now. Okay, AIPAC in the 80s. I'll show you the documents for this. AIPAC in the 1980s started funneling a bunch of money into political campaigns. And when they started to do that, that's when the infiltration, politically speaking, really exploded. And I'm going to show you the documentation of this. Let's pull all this up right now. Okay, so we got documents, we've got forms. All right. See, that's from the Senate. That's from the IRS. All right, I've got all those pulled up, and I will show you these documents here about AIPAC. Let's see if we can pull this up, and okay. I think I have everything I need. All right, so let me bring up the files here on the screen so you can see them, and we'll get started on this. And just another hour, and then I got to go, and I will go back to the chat room here in a second too. Okay, so where's this at? I apologize, I'm doing this in live time. Okay, I've got two different files set up. Let's see if I can move them into one and show them to you at the same time. I don't know if it's going to let me do that. Even with a better computer, sometimes it does not work the way that you want it to work. Try to put these in. I apologize. I'm doing my best here to try to move these files into a single viewer so I can show you all of them at once. Okay, that should work. Close that out. Let's show you this. Okay, here's some of your AIPAC documents. I got the Senate hearing here too. I can show you there's the IRS tax exemption form. Okay, this is from the 1980s here, what I have. Okay, I'm gonna tell you the story and then I'll show you the documents. So basically, here's what happened. John F. Kennedy took office in January of 1961. In November of that year, or rather the next year, November of 1962, within a year, rather, the U.S. Department of Justice ordered the American Zionist Council, the AZC, to register as a foreign agent under the Foreign Agent Registration Act. The order was issued under the direction of Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and resulted from the fact that the AZC was essentially a propaganda and lobbying branch of the Israeli government. This is what the Kennedys were arguing. It's basically what it is, of the Israeli government. It's just a propaganda arm. In 1962-1963, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee investigated both the Jewish Agency for Israel and the American Zionist Council. Transcripts, testimonies, and subpoenas for people like Gottlieb Hammer, the Jewish Agency for Israel representative, and Isidore Hamlin, executive director for the Jewish Agency, the American section, can be found throughout thousands of pages documenting the involvement of AZC in public relations campaigns, lobbying, and the like within the United States. So these people were lobbying and these people were compromising officials. And this is just the introduction of it. And this was already going on in the 1960s. And the Kennedys attempted to put a stop to it. This is the reason that they were assassinated. This is the reason that the Kennedys have experienced a lot of really horrible things. Not saying the Kennedys are good people. I'm saying that this is the reason that a lot of Kennedys have died. Let's put it that way. Okay, so there's an internal memo. I'm going to bring it up here on the screen for you. Here's the memo. It's an internal memo from Lenore Karp to Rabbi Jerome Unger. You can see that here at the top of the document. And this is dated August 27, 1962. It's an internal memo. And it documents the distribution of literature to the various press, academic press, Negro press, that's their own word, even though it just means black, Protestant press, Catholic press, by the AZC Department of Public Information, that is to say, the AZ Department of Propaganda. A 1962-1963 AZC public relations plan, this is an actual public relations plan, here it is. Okay, this public relations plan provided a long list of areas where the committee planned to distribute their propaganda. This is Israeli propaganda, and it included magazines. You can see that, magazines, TV, radio, and film, Christian religious groups, academic circles, daily press, books, speakers, projects and issues, visitors to Israel, and then a miscellaneous section. This is where they were going to distribute their propaganda. Okay, supporting Israel, supporting Israel, supporting Israel. And yes, it does have a little bit to do with the Scofield Bible and making that one verse in Genesis, God blesses those who will bless you. Pretty much the definition of the whole Bible. That's what you need to know. Those who bless Israel will be blessed. Although if Israel means everybody and you support one group in killing other people, God's probably going to curse you, not bless you. Okay, but here's the AIPAC documents. The specifics can be seen in the actual documents that are on your screen right now, the details of where it says countering the opposition. You see that? Countering the opposition. These details include the monitoring and counteraction of all activities carried out here, that's the United States, by the Arabs, American Friends of the Middle East, and the American Council for Judaism. So anybody, including the American Council for Judaism, that attempts to be critical of the propaganda that is being pushed by the Zionist Council, this is the Zionist Council's plan to combat that information, which is why you still see today, 60 years later, everything Arab is bad. Everything Muslim is bad. That comes from the Jewish Zionist lobby. Islam is not your enemy. Although the Justice Department ordered the AZC to register as a foreign agent in 1962, its power was simply shifted to AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Okay, so the AZC was supposed to register as a foreign agent. They're supposed to register as a foreign agent. Unfortunately, for us as Americans, this did not happen. They simply shifted their authority and power over to another group, AIPAC, that did not register as a foreign agent. Really, really crafty, really, really tricky. And so in the process of doing that, they were able to essentially subvert the rule of law. They were able to subvert congressional investigations and, well, at the time, kick the can down the road, as they say. But over time, they've learned a lot from what happened with the AZC, and AIPAC has become a lot more ruthless. Shortly after the order of November 21st, 1962, Isaiah Canaan incorporated AIPAC on January 2nd, 1963, neglecting to register it with the Department of Justice. AIPAC then applied for and was granted IRS tax exemption. They were granted IRS tax exemption. AIPAC was. 1968, with notice from the U.S. Treasury Department that said, you can see this on your screen, the determination is also applicable to your unincorporated predecessor organization under the name of American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs. In other words, they were supposed to register as a foreign agent. They subverted that order, created AIPAC, got tax exemption for AIPAC, and then the IRS even says, oh, it still applies to the AZC. That never, ever, under the government mandate, registered as a foreign agent. And yet they still got tax exemption. Funny how that all works. Okay, this is in 1968. We move on. AIPAC was later investigated by the FBI in the 1980s for illegally obtaining classified documents about U.S.-Israeli trade. This is precisely the time frame when Jonathan Pollard was caught and attempted to seek asylum at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. He was then coddled, of course, by Sheldon Adelson, big donor to Trump, and he was, of course, coddled by Netanyahu, who came to the United States as the leader of the country that Pollard was spying for, and met with him in private, which would be like, there's Russian spies, and we catch one, and they go to jail, and then we let Putin come visit them in jail. Or Chinese spies, and we let Xi Jinping come visit the Chinese spies in jail. That's actually not even the equivalent, because those countries are not as ruthless as Israel is. Israel is so ruthless, Colombian death squads hire them to teach them how to kill better. That's really saying something. That's not an opinion. That's mainline news back in the 80s. Okay, in 1986, this is the memo you see on your screen right now. In 1986, a memo from AIPAC's Deputy Political Director, Elizabeth A. Schreier, called for the various Israeli lobbying committees across the United States to channel their money into preferred political candidates. This is when Israel got its claws and its tentacles and its noses, those big noses, into our business directly. In 2005, Colonel Lawrence Franklin, you might know this story, was indicted alongside 2 AIPAC executives for violating the 1917 Espionage Act by passing the group classified presidential directives and secrets concerning America's Iranian policy. The documents were then turned over to Israel and members of the American media to manipulate and encourage heavier policies toward Iran, from boycotts to military strikes like the one we saw in June of 2025. Franklin was sentenced to 13 years in prison, only saw 10 months of house arrest. The AIPAC agents, Stephen Rosen and Keith Weissman, saw their charges dropped. They dropped the charges against the AIPAC agents. Okay, so the story then goes on that Kennedy, who was also concerned with Israel acquiring and possessing nuclear material for a bomb, and he pressed Israel for inspections, which they didn't want to do. They still haven't signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. November 22nd, 1963, literally 1 year and a day after his administration required AZC to register as a foreign agent, so it's almost ritualistic, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, if the story is to be believed. The blame was placed on Lee Harvey Oswald, who claimed, "I'm just a patsy." Within 2 days, Oswald was shot by Jack Ruby, whose real name is Jacob Leon Rubenstein. And he famously had connections to organized crime, which would have meant that the Jewish mafia assassinated Kennedy because he didn't give the Israelis what they wanted. The shooting, by the way, was broadcast on television. NBC showed it, which at the time was run by Robert E. Kintner, who, by the way, he wasn't Jewish, but it was broadcast under the orders of David Sarnoff, the chairman of the board of NBC's parent company, Radio Corporation of America, meaning that the assassination of the patsy was directed under the orders of a Jewish chairman for NBC. You want to tell me again how Israel doesn't control our country? All you have to do is control a couple of cameras, or like the Joker said, a couple of bullets and a few drums of gasoline. What we just saw in Congress a few hours ago, though, where virtually everybody voted to continue to send money to Israel, it's not a few bullets and a few containers of gasoline. Okay, it's a lot more than that. But that's all you really need. Just a few bullets and a few containers of gasoline, and you've got complete control of a country. You don't have to control everybody. That's absurd. But you do control key individuals. If you control key individuals, you got control of the whole thing. That's it. And that's where we are. That's the position we find ourselves in. Now, if you want to talk about the additional specifics of this in regard to how else Israel has infiltrated our government and how that has to do with Epstein and the owl and all that, well, you can certainly look at the Wesley Clark story about the countries that were going to be destroyed, the 7 countries in 5 years. That's PNAC, which was the Rebuilding America's Defenses document in 2000, literally 1 year before 9/11. Who founded that? William Kristol and Robert Kagan, both Jews. If you move on and you look back a little further than that, you'll find in 1996 the document called Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm, which was prepared by, get this, Richard Pearl, Jewish, Douglas Feith, Jewish, David Wormser, Jewish, Myrev Wormser, Jewish and also Israeli-born, James Colbert, likely Jewish, no formal confirmation, but he worked with Jewish institutes and organizations, probably Jewish. Charles Fairbanks Jr., one of the only ones that was reportedly not Jewish. Robert Lowenberg, Jonathan Torup, Jewish, which means that of the contributors, the 8 contributors to the Clean Break strategy, 5 were Jewish, 2 were likely Jewish, and 1 was likely not Jewish, meaning that the report was between 62.5 and 87.5% Jewish, and very biasedly Israel first. And what did that policy paper do in the 1990s? Well, it was the backup for, or it was really the first major change before PNAC, that instead of having peace or comprehensive peace in the region, Israel didn't like that. So they had a group of, like, mostly Jews, had complete infiltration of our government, write a document that proposed, rather than having peace, we have regime change. So it's the Clean Break document. It's the rebuilding of America's defenses. And what they're doing is very similar to the long history of sabotage and conspiracy and assassinations and bombings, from the King David Hotel, Operation Susanna, to the Lavon affair, where they're willing to kill not just Americans, they're willing to kill Jews to get their end goal fulfilled, which is a larger, more expansive, more powerful Israeli state. In fact, if you want to see something really crazy, and maybe I'll do a full show on this at some point in the future, where we maybe look at my new book. You want to see something really crazy? Look at this document that I have here. It's a real document. It's been declassified years ago. This is called the Ankara document, or the Ankara agreement, or, well, it wasn't really an agreement, but it's called the Ankara. It was formalized in Turkey, Ankara, Turkey. It's the Ankara document. You know what this document was? The Ankara document that you're seeing on your screen right now, this was a proposal by Israeli terrorists, or Zionist terrorists, because there wasn't in Israel yet. But the Stern Gang, which was a spinoff of Irgun wasn't violent enough, and they were based on Zeev Jabotinsky's revisionist Zionism. They weren't extreme enough. So the Stern Gang emerged in, like, the late 30s, early 40s. They were also called Lehi. And they offered to Hitler to work with the Nazis by sabotaging British, who controlled Palestine, mandatory Palestine, to sabotage British supply lines and troop movements. The Zionists literally conspired with Hitler. And this is a lot deeper than just one document. In other words, Zionists went to the Nazis, we know the whole optics of this, right? And said, we will help you kill British. We will help you advance your agenda so long as you continue to send Jews out of the Reich and into mandatory Palestine, which goes back to what was prior to that, about 10 years prior to that, known as the Havara Agreement. And the Havara Agreement was an agreement in 1933 between the leadership of Germany and the Zionist elites around the world, where they agreed to transfer the wealth and to transfer the persons from Germany to mandatory Palestine. And when they didn't get what they wanted, they didn't get enough immigration, they didn't get enough Jews and enough money, and the British were saying, well, we're going to do this, but we got to make sure that we do it the right way. There was the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Well, that's where you get the Irgun Group. The Irgun Group were terrorists. If you ask people, they're like, no, they were Israeli freedom fighters. Fuck you. They weren't Israeli freedom fighters. They were fucking terrorists, many of which went on to become prime ministers of Israel. They were fucking terrorists who bombed and killed anybody, including Jews, who got in the way of advancing their agenda to create the Israeli state. They killed Arabs, they killed British soldiers, they killed Germans, they killed Jews, they killed their own. They don't care. The goal was Israel. In fact, Ben-Gurion said that. He said that in a very famous and controversial speech where he said, if I had to make a choice between evacuating Jews to Britain or Palestine, he's choosing Palestine. In other words, if there was a choice between leaving Jews in Germany and Europe, in the German part of the world, or basically where the Reich had control, if he had a choice between leaving Jews there and letting them die, even though we know that's not accurate, or moving them to Britain instead, he said he'd rather just let them die in the Reich. Because if they're not being moved to mandatory Palestine, there's no reason in moving the Jews. That's what Ben-Gurion said. They don't give a fuck about Jews. And that's the sick thing, because once you get through all the muck of all of this, once you push through all of it, you realize a couple of things. One, the world would have been a lot better if the British had not issued the Balfour Declaration. The world would have been a lot better if the Tsars, the Romanovs, wouldn't have been assassinated. The world would have been a lot better, quite frankly, if Japan and Germany had won the war. And that now is the point we are reaching in our society, where people are starting to recognize this and post this all over the internet. What's more preferable? Gay, queer, bang me in the ass, sodomy, story time for kids, or well-dressed Germans that have a diet that is appropriate to health and exercise? And you can say, oh my God, it's Hitler Youth. What about the Karl Marx school? You know, they've inverted everything, right? The historians, everything's inverted. And when you try to explain the history, they say, oh, it's revisionist. No, it's not revisionist. Let me explain something to you about revisionism. Revisionism means taking the original story and changing it. When we go back to the root source and we find the original story, that's not revisionism. That's the truth. When you change the story, like fabricating a extermination camp, which even the Times of Israel admitted this, there's fake extermination camps that were created by Polish communists. I'll show it to you because it sounds so unbelievable. Type it in fake concentration camp, Times of Israel, and you can see it. Wikipedia page on Warsaw death camp, fake, not real. Okay, so let's put it this way. This is not revisionist, this is the truth. All of this stuff that you hear, all of these narratives, almost all of them, we won't be absolute, but almost all these narratives are inverted. The Germans did not steal and loot all the wealth of Europe because they were greedy. The Jews stole and looted all of the wealth of Europe and Russia and many other places in the world because they were greedy. The anti-Bolshevik white army general, Piotr Wrangel, said that the Jews had stockpiles of precious metals and jewels that they had stolen from other Jews, by the way, that they had stolen from the Russian people. And they had only done that and killed the Romanovs because since at least 1791, Catherine the Great enacted the Pale of Settlement. Why did she enact the Pale of Settlement? Because the Jews were completely corrupting and destroying Russian society and refusing to assimilate. Tsar Nicholas I, about 50 years after that, created policies that were almost identical and made it very clear that his views were based on, in retrospect, what would become Hitler's views about 100 years later. The Tsars had marginalized the Jews because they infiltrated everything. In fact, Tsar Nicholas I attempted to get the Jews to learn Russian language. The Jews rejected it. The rabbis rejected it. So he shut down the rabbinical councils. Oh, it's censorship of religion. This was Tsarist Russia in the 1840s, okay? It's not what you think it is. People looking at the past from a modern perspective. Oh, it's censorship of religion. Well, actually, that's a really interesting point that you might think about that or bring that up, because here's the thing. If I don't want to give children hardcore pornography, does that mean I'm censoring something? Well, yes, it does, because that's the definition of censorship. Censoring means to remove obscene materials. So if I don't want kids to have access to hardcore Jew pornography, that means that I'm a censor. And that's where things get confusing and tricky. So let's look at it this way. The Russians, Catherine the Great, set up concentration camp ghettos for Jews. Let's play a matching game. What did Catherine the Great do that was similar to Hitler? You can match all the same things. What did Tsar Nicholas I do? They saw the Jews as perverts. In fact, Tsar Nicholas I, I'm assuming Catherine the Great thought the same thing, but Tsar Nicholas I said that it was their terrible religion and their perverted book, the Talmud, which is talking about having sex with kids and robbing Gentiles. Even if those things are in discussions, they can be believed literally as much as they can be denied literally because of the context. That was the reason. He said they wouldn't assimilate. That's what Catherine the Great believed. They wouldn't assimilate. They had control of every economic and social system. They weren't Russian. They didn't want to learn the language. They wanted nothing to do with the culture. And they subverted it. So Catherine the Great kicked some fucking ass. And so did Tsar Nicholas I. And so did Tsar Alexander before that. They all saw the same problem and they all acted accordingly, which led to sometime in the 1860s, 1870s, you started to get news reports about how 6 million Jews were being targeted by the evil Russians, even though this had been going on since like 1791. They started to say that the Jews are oppressed. 6 million Jews are oppressed. I can show you the articles. They're all in the New York Times. If I can find, here's one. Here's one from 1910. This goes back to 1869 at least. I went to the New York Times archive and I dug through all this. Before I pull down this particular article, though, I will show you on the screen where it says, Haaretz Times of Israel said the investigation of this Warsaw death camp, it was, let's see, hold on a second. Let me pull the actual, where's the quote at? I thought this was the article with the quote. Oh, yeah, it was a manufactured hoax, and it was manufactured by the Polish communists. I know it says somewhere, maybe it's in the Haaretz article. Maybe we'll go back to that. Anyway, the point is, I'll save that for a second. Let me show you this. Let me show you this article from 1910. 1910, New York Times. Russian Jews in sad plight. We scroll down. Oh, look at that. There's 6 million of them. 6 million souls. 6 million Jews who had been persecuted since at least 1791, and there's still 6 million of them. And this just goes on and on and on. You can find this same reference. I'll show you 2 of them because one I don't think is enough. Maybe I'll show you 3. I just have to share my screen for each one. Here is, and there's so many of these. This is in 1919, or 1918, excuse me. This is 1918, where they had a massive fund put together where they were taking money from Jews and non-Jews alike to create a fund to, quote, rebuild Jewry. I dug these myself out of the archive, so I know these aren't doctored or edited or anything like that. 6 million Jews need our help. This is 8 years later, after they were supposedly being killed in Russia and persecuted. 6 million of them still need your help. And we need all this money. We need 6 million souls will need help to resume normal life. And that's going to include everybody that has any money is going to have to give their money to the Jews. It says this in the article. This is the New York Times. Okay, so anyway, I show you that because what was happening around that time? Turn of the century, Marx had introduced his theories, which were basically a repudiation of every monarchy and every capitalist system before it was capitalist as we know it, every nation state, any group of people or culture. Marx was basically a Zionist, Jewish Satanist. Rejected Judaism, he rejected Christianity. He was a Satanist. And it's the opium of the masses, right? Karl Marx's ideas spawned Bolshevism, and the Bolsheviks took over Russia, and they murdered the Romanovs. And virtually the entire Bolshevik group, all their terrorists, almost all of them were Jewish. This is in mainline historical books, including The Last Days of the Romanovs. And when they murdered the Romanovs, this was actually there's two stages to that revolution, the 1917 revolution. The second stage of that revolution was met conveniently with the Balfour Declaration. So as the Jews had taken over Russia, they had also coerced through Rothschild banking apparatuses and their London branch, they'd coerced the British government into giving them part of Palestine, which the British government did. And they said, everybody gets to live here in peace, though. You don't get to take advantage of the native peoples here. And the Israelis said, no. We want all of it. And so they started killing the British then. And they started killing Jews who resisted. And they started killing anybody who resisted. And they were so vile, they went to the Nazis and said, we will kill British for you if you help us set up the state of Israel. And the Nazis said, you're fucking crazy. The Nazis told the Stern gang, you're fucking insane. Everybody knows these people are bad. The British knew they were bad. The Germans knew they were bad. The whole world knew they were bad. Everybody knows they're bad. In fact, there's an article from the Palestinian Gazette back in, 1944, that says the British are telling Jews to rise up and resist this radicalism, to stop killing His Majesty's forces. They're there to try to help you. And they were killing the British. They're fucking psychotic. They're evil. They're demons. And anyway, the point is, going back to the stolen money, why did they believe that they could do this? Because Tsar Nicholas I, it was based on what he said too, it's true. Tsar Nicholas I said they believe they're incompatible with civilization, which is why they now tell you the Muslims are incompatible with civilization. No, fuck you. The Muslims are not incompatible with civilization. The radical Islamicist groups that the Jews and the Christian Zionists set up, that's incompatible with civilization. The CIA is incompatible with civilization. The Mossad and the IDF are incompatible with civilization, or at least decent humanity. Islam is compatible with civilization. In fact, if it wouldn't be for Islam prior to the Renaissance, you wouldn't have the math and the science. You wouldn't have the geometry. You wouldn't have the art. You wouldn't have the biology. You wouldn't have the mathematics and the medical knowledge that we have, because the church fucking burned all of it. And it was only because of the Muslim world that expanded on that the Renaissance was able to happen. Thank you. Thank you to all the Arabs and Muslims. Judaism is incompatible with civilization. Tsar Nicholas I said this. Why? Not just because of their religion itself. He said because they believe that they are in exile, so they'll never fit in anywhere they go. They'll never assimilate. They believe that a savior is going to come and take them back to Israel. That means they're never going to permanently settle somewhere, which means that they are incompatible with Russian society. This is exactly what Hitler said. In fact, there were Germans 20 years before Hitler that said, we don't want Jews here because they did not build the German state. We don't want anybody, in fact, we don't care if they're Jews or anybody, we don't want anybody here who didn't help us build this and who doesn't want to help us keep it together. Hitler's ideas were not unique. In fact, they were just lifted from what people had written hundreds of years before, including the King of England in 1290. The Spanish, the Portuguese, the Lithuanians, the Jews were expelled from Brazil. Did you know that? Not only were the Jews expelled from Brazil, let me show you why the Jews were expelled from Brazil. This is from a Jewish encyclopedia. Let me show you why the Jews were expelled from Brazil. Because they were demonstrating the same kinds of behaviors they showed in Russia. And this is one of the most fascinating entries that you'll ever read in an encyclopedia. This is from the Jewish Encyclopedia, from their website. It says this: on the virgin soil of America, the Jews were among the pioneers of agriculture. Down here at the bottom, you see. And it goes on to say this, during the 17th, Go up to the top of the next page. 17th century, the sugar industry was monopolized by the Jews. And with their expulsion from Brazil, it was transplanted to the West Indies, where in 1686, David D. Marcato's invention of new sugar mills benefited the sugar trade in Barbados. The Jews in Georgia, chief among them Abraham de Leon, transplanted vine and silk culture from Portugal to America. They were kicked out of other countries for slavery, economic slavery, physical slavery, the ethno-supremacy and the chosenness syndrome. And when they came to America, they were masters of agriculture, and they ran the slave trade in part. I mean, in the Dutch colonies, it was like 20-something% base minimum Jewish. So Jewish, they didn't even have days to sell slaves, or they didn't hold a slave auction on days that were Jewish holidays. But they will have wars. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, you name it. This is from the Jewish Encyclopedia, that they pretty much controlled the industry. They pretty much controlled the sugar industry. I mean, isn't that kind of like incredible? And if you read further, it's a big article here. It actually says, I'm trying to find the part in the article where it says, it actually says that in the South, see if I can find the exact quote. I have the quote. I'll read you the quote, and then I'll try to find it in the article. In fact, the cotton plantations in many parts of the South were wholly in the hands of the Jews, and as a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them. This is why they were kicked out of Russia, too. They ran the slave trade. Okay. People don't hate Jews because they're Jews. People hate Jews because they're bankers. People hate Jews because they're slave traders. Here it is. In fact, the cotton plantations in many parts of the South were wholly in the hands of the Jews, and as a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them. Well, it was already among them because that's why they were kicked out of Brazil. Okay, so let's go back to that whole thing about General Wrangel collecting all this gold and silver and the paper money and the jewels and like hoarding it like fucking goblins. But the guy that ran the anti-Bolshevik, he was the commander of the anti-Bolshevik forces. This is what he saw. By the way, I see Mike D in the chat. Mike D said Watto from Star Wars was a slave trader. He was. And the Gringotts bankers, they were Jews. And the pig orc was Harvey Weinstein. It's true. Anakin, my boy. Anakin. He's a Jew. He even had a Jew hat on. It's not a debatable thing. Why do you think they put that in the movie? Okay, anyway. The money that the Jews had stolen in Russia. They accused the Germans of this. Oh, the Germans stole a bunch of money. Oh, the Germans burned literature. Oh, the Germans didn't like civilization. No, the Germans loved civilization. They saved their civilization from a communist takeover back in like 1920, was it 1920, 1921? It was like 6 months before the Versailles Treaty was signed, which means that if there would have been a communist uprising in Berlin that would have been successful, you can bet your bottom dollar there would have been no strict Treaty of Versailles because they would have had control of Germany. They didn't, so they infiltrated it economically and socially. We hear about Hitler Youth. We don't hear about the Karl Marx schools that they didn't teach. Like Hitler Youth taught indoctrination to the state. Karl Marx schools taught indoctrination to the mob. There is no state except the people that have the power, the Politburo. Karl Marx schools taught a new form of education where they taught kids how to be activists. Sound familiar? Why don't you hear about Karl Marx schools in 1912 Berlin? You hear all about Hitler Youth. Why don't you hear about the Gulag Archipelago outside of the book series? Why don't you hear about the Gulag Archipelago? Why don't you hear about the Gulag? Do you know what they had people doing in those gulags? You want to know what they did? The first gulag, the first concentration camp, it was set up at a monastery. It's a monastery. And they imprisoned at that monastery the monks. They also sent other members of the clergy and writers. These are the communists. was on the Solovetsky Islands, 1923, Solovki Special Purpose Camp, the prototype of the Gulag system, founded by monks as a monastery. The camp held clergy, writers, and other enemies of the state. So they literally took a church and they imprisoned the clergy, the writers, and enemies of the state. And you know what they made them do in these other Gulag systems? They made them, for example, Magadan, central to the slave transport of the Gulag system. Kolyma is a major site in the Gulag system. They literally imprisoned Gentiles and forced them to mine for gold. It's a historical fact. Why do you not hear about this? The Gulag was way worse than anything the Germans did. Significantly worse. But you hear about Hitler Youth and concentration camps. You don't hear about Karl Marx schools and Gentiles being forced to mine for gold for Jews. Why? Probably pretty obvious by now why. You know what else you hear? You hear that the Germans hated art. What's like the talking points you hear today? What did the Germans actually burn? They burned Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science. They burned the books from that disgusting place. The books that were in that disgusting place were sex and gender related materials. In fact, the Holocaust Encyclopedia even acknowledges this. They don't tell you that in school. They don't explain the nuance of it to you. Here is the Holocaust Encyclopedia website. It admits in May 1933, Nazis looted Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science and destroyed much of the archives in the Berlin book burning. Okay, it's about time for this myth to die right now, a really horrible, nasty, but fast death. The Nazis did not burn beautiful art and destroy beautiful statues and destroy the great literature of the world. The Nazis burned pornography. They outlawed pornography as immoral. They outlawed smut and licentious material. They burned magazines. They burned books that taught children how to have their genitals cut off. They performed those types of procedures at the Institute of Sexual Science. In fact, Magnus Hirschfeld, the Jewish sexologist, introduced the first transgender identification cards. That's what the Nazis burned. Oh, you're like Nazis banning and burning books. Yeah, I am. I would be like a Nazi if me not wanting to give pornographic material to kids is the definition of Nazi. So they've redefined what was National Socialist. They've made Nazi a slur. And then when you say, I agree with what the Nazis did, it doesn't matter what it was they did. It matters that you're a Nazi and you agree because they're bad. But what they actually did was burn. I'm not a Nazi, by the way. I'm a constitutionalist. What they did was burn the smut and the garbage of Magnus Hirschfeld. Now, you're not going to be able to do that today because all this pornography, from AVN to, I mean, what did Joanne Angel name her company, the Jewish porn star? Burning Angel. She named it Burning Angel. Another Jewish company, Wicked. Like, these are fucking demons. You can't burn that pornography today, right? You can't go into the institute and burn it because this power has spread across the United States. It's infiltrated everything. Education with Karl Marx schools, Hollywood with their anti-American propaganda, anti-Russian propaganda, anti-everything propaganda. You think it's a coincidence that Donald Trump put 100% tariffs on foreign movies? You think that has anything to do with making American movies better? No, Trump's tariffs on movies are Jewish tariffs on competition from other countries, including countries like South Korea that makes pretty good movies. It's a tariff on non-Jewish products. It's a boycott of non-Jewish products. And this shit happened in the 1930s. You know how they tell you all this stuff about, oh, there was Crystal Night. Oh, there were boycotts of Jewish businesses. Oh, oy vey. Oh God, it's a shanda. No, actually, this is what really happened. And this is all verifiable, even on the Holocaust Encyclopedia website. Hitler comes to power in 1933 in January. In April of that year, there is a massive protest in Germany. It's not very successful, whether that's because of propaganda or something else, but it's not very successful. The protest is against Jewish businesses. You have the stormtroopers pictured outside of businesses holding signs, don't support Jewish goods, etc. And there were a couple people that got really angry and rough and pushed a few people. Prior to that, the Jews in New York, and I don't mean that as a slanderous, inflammatory thing. I mean the actual Jewish and Zionist organizations got together in a meeting and decided to have a gathering at Madison Square Garden. And some of the Jews said, we shouldn't do this because it's going to inflame anti-Jewish sentiment. And initially, a lot of people agreed, and then they changed their mind almost immediately and said, no, we need these anti-German protests. So they protested. They boycotted. Boycott German goods. You can see the image of this all over New York and Chicago. They organized hundreds, if not thousands, of anti-German protests across the United States. This was before the April 1st protest that we know all about, where the Germans boycotted Jewish businesses. This was in early 1930, after Hitler came to power, before there was ever a German protest. Now, there was talk about we don't want to support Jewish businesses, but there was no massive protest like happened on April 1st. The anti-German protests. Joseph Goebbels said, okay, look at it this way. If you are going to boycott German products, and remember, Germany was really hurting, especially because of the Versailles Treaty and 10 years of de facto economic communist rule. Joseph Goebbels said, if you're going to boycott our products and you're going to use your banking and corporate connections to destroy Germany economically, Goebbels reasonably said, how about this? We're going to have our own protest. Okay? His protest was April. The Jewish protest was in July. Last time I checked, July comes before April. The German protest took place after the Jewish protest. And after that, the Jews were really angry. Oh my God, they attacked Jewish businesses. Oh my God. And the media, of course, was virtually completely in the hands of the Jews. And anything out of Germany was never allowed to be seen, just like AIPAC doesn't want us to see anything out of the Arab world. And so Goebbels said in response to that, look, we won't have any more protests if you don't have any more protests. Let's just end it right now. The Jewish groups spit in Goebbels' face and said, fuck you. And then Goebbels said, all right, you want it, you're going to get it. It's going to be the total economic annihilation of Jews in Germany. You've attacked us. You've engaged in warfare against us, economic and social. We have a right and a duty to defend our people and our country. It's fucking on now. Goebbels was right. And the Germans had every economic and social justified right to defend their country and their people from what was at the time not just Jewish control, but alien, foreign control. They weren't even citizens. They didn't assimilate, just like in Russia 100 years before. And then we fast forward. We fast forward to Kristallnacht. Oh, it's such a horrible thing. The Jews again were attacked. Oh my God. Well, why were they attacked? Why was there something called Kristallnacht? Why was there a group of Germans that got really angry and started vandalizing Jewish businesses? Well, first of all, this was 5 years after the first boycott. 5 years. Okay, 5 years after the Jews boycotted Germany, and Goebbels said, all right, look, you stop it or it's going to be total warfare. And then the Jews declared war on Germany and said, we declare war on Germany. They actually declared war on Germany. Did you know that? Probably didn't tell you that in your history class, but the Jews actually declared war on Germany. Type it in. Judea declares war on Germany, 1933. And you can pull up the articles, you can pull up the headlines, which, by the way, gives some very interesting statistical data on the number of Jews that were living in Germany, about, 600,000 or something. But here's one of the articles. We can actually find the image itself. Pull up the actual image itself. Here it is. Notice that date, March 24th. That was before the protest in Germany. Judea declares war on Germany. Looks like the Germans didn't start the war. It looks like the Jews and the Zionists started the war. Funny how that happens. Okay, so we move on to Crystal Night. How and why would the Germans, who were like leading the world in every single case of like scholarly excellence, these highly intelligent, highly educated Germans, masters of like math and science and physics and biology and chemistry, very smart people, led the world in Nobel Prizes, just all one day got up and were like, today is not a good day for the Jew. I think I'm going to kill some Jews today. Guten Morgen. Bullshit. It was a long series of things that had left the Germans destitute, without money and without food, and they said, fuck it. That's what actually happened. And they got behind a charismatic leader, and then there were Jewish boycotts. And why did the boycotts happen with the Jews anyway? Because the Germans were like, look, you've got control. We're going to wrestle control back. It's Germany. It's not Jewishny. Okay, so 5 years after, they always condense this. There were boycotts and riots, and oh my God, it's a shanda. Shut the fuck up. You declared war on Germany. You got your fucking asses handed to you. The only reason that the Jews weren't completely removed from Europe was because the Germans just wanted them out of Germany and the Reich and sent them all to Palestine. If the Germans really wanted to kill all the Jews, they would have killed all the Jews. It's fucking ludicrous. It's like saying Iran's going to destroy Israel. Why? That's the Holy Land to the Muslims too. It's all a lie. So you fast forward 5 years, and what do you get? You get Crystal Night. Oh, there's this horrible protest. Do you know why there was a protest and a bunch of violence? Because a Jewish terrorist, here we go again, killed a German diplomat. That's why. You notice that if you read this on like the Encyclopedia Britannica, Crystal Night, the night of November 9th through 10th, 1938, when German Nazis attacked Jewish persons and property. The name Kristallnacht refers ironically to the litter of broken glass left in the streets after these pogroms. The violence continued after the day of November 10th, and in some places, acts of violence continued for several more days. Not very specific, is it? Well, what caused the pogrom? Oh, maybe it was the assassination of Ernst von Roth, a German diplomat serving at the German embassy in Paris, who had nothing to do with Jews that were illegally in the country being forced immigrated into Poland. And he decided to kill this diplomat. And, or rather, Ernst von Ramp was killed by a Jewish terrorist. Who was the Jewish terrorist? Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old radical Polish Jew who killed Greenspan. This is the guy, just like Jack Ruby. And when the Germans found out, oh, they killed a German diplomat, then they rioted. Because even by 1938, there were about 30% of Germany was still under Jewish control, despite all the laws and all the restrictions and all the same stuff that the Russians did. Okay, so in other words, everything you've been told, Hitler Youth, concentration camps, Hitler had a weird penis, all that's an inversion of reality. It's gulags. It's Karl Marx schools. The Germans rounded up all the treasure. No, the Jews rounded up all the treasure in Russia. The Germans boycotted. The Jews boycotted before. The Germans declared war on Jews. The Jews declared war on Germany before. There was a pogrom in 1938. Yes, there was. Why? There's a reason why. Because Greenspan assassinated a high-level German diplomat over immigration issues, just like you see happening in the United States today. And the Germans revolted against that. So I'm confused here. Did Hitler and the Germans start World War II, or did the Jews start World War II? Which is the really important question, and it's the $1 million question today. It's a $6 million question. Because that is what happened. International bankers, Zionists, and the like started World War II, not Hitler. Oh, he invaded Poland. Why? Because of the Treaty of Versailles. Why? World War I. What started that? You could just keep going back into the history, back and back and back and back and back. And these words, Nazi and Hitler, these have become nothing but slurs. They don't have any meaning at all. It's hard to even find a copy of Hitler's book that's not edited, or a copy of Hitler's book that hasn't been burned or shredded. You read it, you're like, this is the same thing happening right now today in the United States. In fact, what Hitler's writing is basically the talking points of the Christian conservative right. But it's also the Christian conservative right who supports the very people that Hitler is talking about in the book. You know, the pornography, the abortion, the illegal immigration, the immorality. Like, the Christians support all of that through the Jews, who supply 50% or more of the money to the Democrat Party and control both houses of Congress, or both chambers of Congress, House and the Senate, and have infiltrated through blackmail, spy devices, honeypot traps, or just direct, recording conversations. Every president, going back to Kennedy. That's what the Epstein story is all about. It's just the uncovering of a small little piece of this history. See, being a Nazi is stupid, because we have no need for Nazi political ideology today. That's dumb. For lots of reasons. Being a socialist or a communist is also really dumb. But here's the thing. When you push people to the edge, like they have in Russia, Germany, Brazil, Portugal, Spain, England, and you name it, the list goes on, you will produce the same end result. And the same end result is going to be absolute war and hell on earth. And at the end of the day, turns out Hitler was the one that created Israel in large part. And it was also the Zionists who killed their own people to create Israel. Israel's not really a Jewish state. Israel is a concentration camp for Jews. That's essentially what it is. Now they're building one in Rafah, by the way, a moral concentration camp, they call it, in Rafah, just this last week. Oh, we're going to build a concentration camp in Rafah, and we're going to force all the people. They can't leave. They're going to be stuck there. And if you compare that to Germans, then you can't do that. That's evil. So that's kind kind of I leave the show for you tonight. tstradio.info. Look at the chat room here again. I'm really bad at the chat. I apologize. Go back to the chat room here. I was thinking about showing you one more thing on the screen. Maybe I could show you. Maybe we'll save it for another show. I was going to show you the crematorium at Auschwitz, which has like a 3-person elevator. Yeah, they killed millions though through a 3-person elevator. That's a whole nother show. Anyway, Sunspots, thank you for joining the show. Edward Preston, thank you for joining us. Lima, thank you for joining the show. The Jews started the war in order to take Palestine and grab the U.S. by the balls, which absolutely, that's pretty much the history, and which means that being an adult means that you recognize, oh, fuck, I think the bad guys actually won the war. Like the legitimate, there's not really good guys or bad guys in war, but I think the really bad guys won the war. That's why General Patton was killed too. By the way, he was killed on Hanukkah. They fucking killed him. Well, they tried to kill him on Hanukkah, and then he died on the winter solstice. Sure, it was all coincidental, because he wanted to go fight those evil Russians. And in fact, General Patton wrote what Hitler wrote. He called the Jews a virus. Wrangel called them Hitler called them a moral pestilence. Patton called them a virus. And I think it was Wrangel who called them a plague. What is Israel, like the most hated country on planet Earth today? It's coming. You're going to see history repeat itself. I've been saying this for months and months and months and months and months and months and months. It's happening. Thank you, Lancelot. Thanks, Mike D, for joining us. I hope that everybody enjoyed the show. PT is here. Yeah, Lev to whore the people in South America stealing kids. Yep, just like the Tengu in Japan. You're right. Yep, you're right. All right, all of our other listeners in the chat. I'll hold on for 1 second here. Anybody got anything else that you want to add to the show real quick? Oh yeah, but Mike D, that's a good point. I didn't mention that. Catherine rejected British diplomatic overtures to dispatch the Imperial Russian Army to North America during the Revolutionary War. That's true. Yeah, they went to Catherine the Great and said, "Can you send some Russian troops to defeat these farmers?" And Catherine the Great said, "Nope." So you can thank the French and the Russians for what you have in America. Marion, thank you for joining us. Nada, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate everybody who tuned in. I did not intend for the show to go 3 hours, nor did I intend to get into this particular subject matter. But the Moloch and Al story, I think the show's broken down like this. The first hour is about Hoover, and Hoover's argument for the mafia being baloney is pretty much what the DOJ and FBI just said. Doesn't exist. And where there is crime, it's just individual crime. There's no Epstein list, but he did abuse a bunch of people. But the people that he abuses are all individual, unique cases. It's the same Hoover story. Moloch is not, an owl. Moloch is a bull. The Minotaur and the owl are representative of what Epstein and Maxwell were doing, along with the Mossad and other agents. And Wexner's involved too, with possessed by the Dybbuk demon, the Jewish demon Dybbuk. And then in the third hour, we're talking about the real history. And the real history is the Jews declared war on Germany. The Jews started World War II. And this is going to happen again, ladies and gentlemen, if it is exposed the kind of power that these people have. They will blow the goddamn world up to prevent them from losing power. And the sickest part is they'll try to profit from it as the world is burning. Good Jews, just like the British said, need to stand up to this and resist it. You are just like blacks are not confined to the Democrat Party. You can leave that ideological plantation. Jews do not have to be confined to the state of Israel and be confined to that concentration camp ideologically or physically. Jews obviously can have their own opinions, and it's okay to say, I'm Jewish and I don't support any of this, and be on the right side of history. I think that's where I leave you with tonight's show. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Thank you so much for listening. tstradio.info. Please subscribe. Please buy a book if you haven't done that. Thank you for listening in the free archive as well. RDGable@yahoo.com. Jim Conway asks, do they have their own demons? Yeah, because Judaism's a religion. Judaism was perverted. You've got the influence of Babylon. You've got the influence of India. People like, Judaism is the oldest religion. What the fuck are you talking about? Hinduism is like 10,000 years older than Abraham. Abraham is not the ideological philosophical father of religion. That's preposterous. Animism is like tens of thousands of years old. Shamanism is like tens of thousands of years old. And my God, Hinduism, before it was Hinduism, is tens of Hindustan, tens of thousands, at least 10,000 years old. Jews do not own suffering. What about the Armenian Holocaust, the Holodomor? They don't own chosenness or uniqueness. They don't own, slavery or the Holocaust. They don't own anything. They're just people. And when they don't act like people, that's when there's a problem. When anybody acts like they're better than you, you don't like that person. And that's why people don't like Jews, because you act better than everybody else. You're not. Shut the fuck up and get back in line, the human line, where we're all equal and the same. You're not chosen by God. And if God did choose you, holy shit, God has horrible tastes in genetics. Have you seen some of the people that not American women? Have you seen like Russian women? Have you seen like Japanese women? Have you seen like even men in other countries? If God chose the Jews to be chosen, he has the worst taste in women. He has the worst taste in genetics, because he picked one of the ugliest group of motherfuckers to be the chosen people. And I'm saying that as both a joke and I'm also being serious. Get real, okay? Everybody is chosen because we're all God's children. All of us. And that includes we, the people. Have a great night. Stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy. I'll talk to you on the next broadcast.